Ladies and gentlemen, today is September the 14th, 2025, and we are here to talk about the world. Current events, foreign policy, economics, you name it, we'll talk about it in another episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith. Smith.
Hello,
Yo,
how are you?
doing well. Day 2 subathon, so we are cruising.
Oh, nice.
We just had some guests over and had burgers and hot dogs barbecued.
Oh,
Or
that sounds
grilled.
good.
Yeah. Food is always nice, and when you overeat, then you don't have to eat for a while. So,
Are you still taking recommendations for the subathon?
yes. Do you have one?
I was going to say Sins of a Solar Empire.
Nice. I will write that down. Sins of a Solar Empire. The games that I have on already, Mechabellum, which that one I think I recommended to you.
You got it for me, actually.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, it's very entertaining. I'll be playing that pretty soon. Street Fighter 6, that one I've played before. It's a really good fighting game. I'll play some Heroes of the Storm with viewers. There's
nice.
a bunch of usual StarCraft and Dota stuff for me as well. Dota with viewers. Baldur's Gate 3 crowd control. So that's going to be where people can like donate and kill us or give us items and stuff. I'm doing that with Chai, the other streamer I collab with.
Oh, cool.
Vermintide, have you played that?
I have. I actually have that installed.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's pretty fun. It's kind of like Left 4 Dead, but Warhammer.
Space Marine 2 with my brother. Peak
Okay.
with Chai. Peak is really funny. It's like a climbing game. Soul Calibur 6 is a classic that we do basically every time. Warhammer Total War. Tekken 8. I'm going to try to get gold rank in that. Warcraft 3. Let's see. I know
Quite the list.
Expedition 33, Stellar Blade, Doom, The Dark Ages.
Wow.
So I'll add Sins of a Solar Empire. Sweet.
It's a lot of stuff in there. It's a huge list.
Yep. I have 3 weeks. So
Gotcha.
3 weeks of time to explore all of those. I've heard Expedition 3 is extremely good.
Wait, Expedition 33?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That one I think is going to get Game of the Year. That's what people are saying.
I've heard lots of good things about it.
Interesting plot, interesting characters, great music, great voice acting. A lot of passion to it. I feel like that's one of the things that's been rewarded recently is doing something that has a lot of passion and a great style to it. A lot of the big games that have taken off, it just seems like they're also able to take risks. Taking risks that make your game a little bit more edgy, because we're in a, I wouldn't say a post-woke world, but we're in the sense of there's some frustration with too many restrictions, so a lot of people are trying to take up more space for themselves and regain some ground in a sense. But yeah, speaking of, it's been a insane week, at least in terms of how much people buzz about it, because one of the things that I noticed with you is sometimes there's a week where there's a lot of political drama that's more cultural, but it doesn't actually turn into anything that's policy based, so it's just kind of noise. But
Yeah.
sometimes it does point to changes that may happen, so it can be substantive. And this week I had to do a list. I don't know if you were listening to the stream when we started, but the stuff that I wrote down: Nepal got a new prime minister elected via Discord. Bolsonaro actually goes to jail. London protests have been crazy. There was a dude who was shot in the US, and there's been a lot of political stuff about that. And
Oh
then
yeah.
riots in Indonesia and Russian drones in Poland. That's what I have.
Yeah, that's a pretty good list. And encompasses a lot of what I had.
Nice.
I think I had an election in Norway in addition to that. A prime minister in France lost a vote of no confidence, and a couple other items, miscellaneous in nature.
That's
But yeah, you pretty
Macron?
well covered it.
Is that Macron or is he the president?
He's the president.
Okay. Losing
Yeah,
a vote of
France.
confidence means that they did vote that it was no confidence?
Correct.
Okay. Why did they have no confidence in this person?
He's just very unpopular. But I think the specific impetus was some tax reforms he was trying to push, which people didn't like. Yeah, France has a debt issue. Its fiscal situation is not great. And there's a lot of disagreement in the country about how to deal with it. So he lost the vote of no confidence, and as a result, there should be either a replacement or a new elections. I think France was due for new elections relatively soon anyway. So probably the latter, I would guess. There's been a lot of instability in France on account of the growth and popularity of what's her name, the Marine Le Pen's party, the National Rally. I think that's what it used to be called. They might have changed their name again. They've changed their name a couple of times over the past 10 years. So the balance of power is pretty much between her party and then what was it called? Basically a left-wing alliance of different left-wing parties led by Mélenchon. I keep forgetting the name of their coalition, but it's more far left in orientation. They tend to really push hard for a much larger role for the state, much higher taxes, etc. So, nothing all that surprising. But the issue is that those are pretty stark choices. Marine Le Pen versus Mélenchon. If you're a centrist in France, neither of those choices are very appealing.
Yeah, it seems like the gap between left and right is really wide right now.
Yeah, it is. It is. So anything that kind of upsets the balance kind of opens the door to one or the other potentially coming to power. Emmanuel Macron has basically made his career since he's been in office trying to ensure that doesn't happen. He'll strategically align with one or the other, generally the right, in order to try to get stuff done. But he generally tries to block some of the most extreme stuff. But sort of his Achilles heel is France's economy, which continues to suffer from relatively low growth, and that's created fiscal problems, like I said. And there's basically no way to deal with that particular problem in a way that's going to be politically popular. It is a kind of poison to chalice. Whoever drinks from it is going to suffer for it. So generally, it's better to be a populist and just try to run on saying you'll fix it or opposing the policies of people who are trying to fix it but whom you disagree with. But ultimately, whoever actually tries to deal with it will inevitably be unpopular because your only options are to give people what they want and make the fiscal problem worse, or actually implement real reforms that are going to make you extremely unpopular. So that's a big part of why Emmanuel Macron and his party have lost so much support over the past 5 years, the past couple of years in particular. And at this point, it is kind of a minority party. It's just in power because they're the kingmakers. Nobody else has enough votes in order to, well, in the case of Emmanuel Macron himself, nobody else has the votes to fully win on their own. Neither Mélenchon or Marine Le Pen can win the presidency by themselves. And so invariably, generally the left will vote for Macron just so that the far right doesn't get into power. But that doesn't mean they like Macron. In fact, he's quite unpopular at this point amongst broad swaths of France's political spectrum. So his position is very precarious. His party's position is even worse. They've lost huge swaths of the seats they've held in the legislature over the past couple of years. So at this point, it is pretty much the left-wing coalition versus Marine Le Pen's party. His party just barely has enough to stick it out. The prime minister was actually not even from Macron's party. He was from a center-right party that used to be prominent, but has basically all but collapsed. His name was Beru, I think. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. But he was very much, he was of the center-right party, and he created an alliance with Macron after the last election. And his appointment was very controversial, because in particular, people on the left believed that somebody from their coalition should have received the appointment, which had kind of been the norm. But Macron didn't want to give it to either the far right or the far left. He wanted somebody from the center, and so Beru got the nod. So Beru in particular has been kind of controversial and has received significant criticism. So it's no surprise that eventually they finally pushed him out. Probably Marine Le Pen had something to do with that. They themselves would prefer one of their own people, but of course, Macron wasn't going to do that. So where we go from here will say a lot about the future course of French politics. Macron has his work cut out for him if he wants to continue to play kingmaker and try to balance the two major factions.
So just to clarify, this is a role that is appointed by the president, but because the parties have the ability to give a vote of no confidence, they could eject someone if they don't like them?
It's nominated by the president and then approved by the legislature.
Gotcha.
He was able to win in spite of being unpopular because Marine Le Pen's party agreed to support him. But they've always been skeptical and have been looking for opportunities to get him out and potentially leverage that into new elections and potential advancement for their own interests. So presumably he lost a bunch of their votes as well. I haven't read the details yet. Basically, everybody hates everybody else in French politics right now. None of the major coalitions get along, and they just at most tolerate each other when they have common interests.
No common ground.
Yeah. I haven't seen this story covered as much in international press. It's kind of been overshadowed by all the other drama of the past couple weeks. But that is a significant development for French politics. So I'm interested to see what happens there. It's still early, though, so we may not know for a while. Let's see. What on your list did you want to get to next?
Order doesn't matter a ton. How about the Nepal electing on Discord? That sounds funny.
So I don't know if it's actually true that they elected anybody on Discord. The protest obviously has a strong online element, and I think there was an attempt by the main protest Discord channel to pick somebody. But from what I was reading, the actual choice of new prime minister was made between the president and the protester leadership. Now, maybe that happened on Discord too. I didn't read that, but my impression is that there was an actual negotiation and that the former chief of the Supreme Court was the compromised choice. Yeah, political unrest in Nepal is not all that surprising. It's been pretty restive for the past couple decades.
What are people unhappy about?
A lot of things. There was, it was something like a 30, 40-year civil war in Nepal. It had been run by a monarch, and the principal opponent were Maoists, generally working in the countryside. And they actually, in coalition with other groups, successfully overthrew the monarchy about roughly 20 years ago or so, I want to say. And so since then, politics has been kind of restive. Not everybody has been particularly happy with the Maoists, although they did originally have significant popularity. The party has fractured a bit. I think for the most part, the party is still mostly intact, but they did lose a couple leading figures. So there's, I think, one major splinter party in particular that ended up becoming a kind of kingmaker within the context of Nepali politics. And a good chunk of the past 10 years was basically sniping between the splinter party and the main party. Everybody else, though, was very uncomfortable with the supremacy of the Maoists after the revolution. There was actually an election, I think the second election after the revolution. Mind you, the Maoists had done very well, like in the first election. And in this second election, it was actually a coalition of opposition parties that successfully won a majority, which was impressive because the coalition comprised something like 30 different parties. Like it was crazy large. It was almost predestined to fail. You know, even smaller coalitions tend to be very, very unstable, but 30 is just not workable. that wasn't going to last, and it did not. So ever since then, there's been lots of push and pull between the Maoist and then everybody else, pretty much. Being a developing country, just one of the implicit, inherent parts of the politics is anti-corruption. They don't really have strong institutions as far as policing corruption, rule of law, etc. So there's almost always examples of corrupt activity by this, that, or the other bureaucrat or politician. That was part of the impetus for the current protests. I think it was a couple months ago, there had been a media campaign online in Nepal by reformists to draw attention to corruption in politics as part of an effort to pressure the government into good behavior. Now, this may or may not be related to that campaign, but the government after that did end up technically banning social media. From what I was reading, it was not meant to be a permanent ban, though. Apparently, they were trying to get social media companies to register. But when they announced that they would be banned until they registered, the public freaked the fuck out, the youth in particular. And that set off some mass protests. The protests scaled up over time, partly because of the harshness of the crackdown. There were some police that used live rounds on the protesters, and a couple people did die. I think the death toll at this point over the past couple weeks is something like 70 people dead, if I remember correctly. So that, of course, always aggravates people. And the protests scaled up correspondingly to the point where protesters actually raided the parliament building and set it on fire. People perusing Reddit or other social media may have seen pictures of that over the past week or two. So eventually the government did resign, and the president, whom, contrary to what you may think, is not like a powerful position in Nepali politics, it's more of a symbolic position. It's kind of like the Queen in UK politics. The president came to an agreement with the protest leadership on a compromise choice for prime minister, and this is going to be an interim prime minister, so just temporary, presumably until new elections can be held. I would point out that this is probably not going to change a whole lot. I've seen a lot of people on social media saying that it's a revolution and that Gen Z in Nepal, for whatever reason, people have been characterizing it as a Gen Z revolution. They've been trying to suggest that it's a revolution and that they've successfully changed the government. That's not really true. It's not abnormal in countries with more restive politics to have mass protests followed up by a new government. And when I say new government, I don't mean like a wholly new government. I don't mean full revolution, like regime change style. I'm talking more just about new leadership. So that's not all of that unusual in response to mass protests of this scale, and that's effectively what we're seeing. It's possible that there could be reformist candidates that will do well in new elections, and there could be a substantive change in the balance of power in Nepali politics, but I'm pretty dubious. There's a lot of traditionalists in Nepal, conservative Hindus of one kind or another. The Maoists are still popular. Like the traditional entrenched establishment actors in Nepal are probably still going to hold a lot of sway. Reformists can leverage this to make some ground, but I'm dubious about the prospects for them actually making substantive gains in the legislature, which is what they would need in order to form a government that is reformist in nature, that would actually try to tackle some of the issues that set the kids off, so to speak.
I'm just thinking of traditionalists reacting to stuff with emojis to vote in this this brave Gen Z political world.
Yeah, I think if they had not banned social media, probably people would not have reacted the way they did.
Yeah, you don't take away our memes. They should know better. That's fucked up.
Yeah, yeah, I think the youth vote, the street, so to speak, in Nepal would have probably just continued on as normal, even in spite of the corruption, the anti-corruption media campaign and whatnot. People are generally pretty passive. But when the government took action, that's when the claws came out. So full credit for people being involved enough to actually be proactive and challenge the government. But given how relatively disorganized it was, I'm a little dubious that it's going to have an actual long-term impact. I'm not even really sure why the internet picked up on this so much in the first place. Nepal is not really the kind of place that gets a lot of attention normally.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, it was cool to like hear about a platform that we use regularly that was used for something political and that young people are doing stuff. So it's got a lot of the notes of an inspiring story, even if it is
Well,
drummed up.
it's not unusual for Discord to be used by politically active folks in the developing world. I'm sure. Well, for example, Bangladesh, right? Bangladesh's government was overthrown a few years ago. It didn't receive nearly this much attention. But I can all but guarantee you, at least some of the people involved in the protests would have been on Discord.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more of a normal thing at this point that applications like Discord are used to help organize and spread a message. That's not unusual. It's kind of like Facebook back during the Arab Spring.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody would bat an eye if somebody tried to do something on Facebook these days. Discord is just a little bit better because it's relatively more anonymous. Facebook actually works with authoritarian governments to shut down speech if requested to, but Discord, as far as I know, doesn't really care as much about that. That's just not how their business model is structured.
Interesting story. Yeah, you don't hear about Nepal too much. What's the population of Nepal?
I'm going to say about 10 million. I could check. Oh, I was way off. It's about 30 million. Yeah, it's one of those relatively poor Himalayan kingdoms. It was never absorbed into the British Empire, but it was kind of sort of implicitly part of the British Empire. One of those deals. Wasn't really worth conquering because it was a relatively poor mountain kingdom. They didn't really have like a lot of natural resources or other stuff that the British wanted. But it was kind of too small to really defy British will too, so they kind of had to do what they say. Have you ever heard of the Gurkhas?
Gurkhas sounds familiar. Were those the trained fighters that are like badasses?
The what fighters?
Trained or like experienced in some way.
Oh, basically, yeah. So the British recruit Gurkhas into their military and have used them for like 100 years now as shock troops. They're considered very good fighters. They're actually from Nepal. Yeah, there's a couple other Himalayan kingdoms as well. Bhutan is one. Actually, I guess Bhutan is technically the only other one left at this point. Bhutan is even lesser known than Nepal. And unlike Nepal, it's not actually a democracy. It's technically a constitutional democracy. And actually, even that is relatively new. I think they've only been a constitutional democracy for maybe 10 years. Before that, they were an absolute monarchy still. And the monarch still retains significant political power within their politics. And Bhutan's a little bit different, too, because it's Buddhist. Like, clear-cut majority Buddhist. Whereas Nepal has a lot of Buddhism, but it also has a considerable amount of Hinduism.
I see, yeah.
Yeah,
Does it
India actually has used that in the past.
makes sense geographically? You're bordering India and China, so
Yeah, there were some big protests in Nepal, I think 5, 6 years ago, where this one, I guess it was technically a caste group in Nepal, was protesting on the major road connecting Nepal to India, or one of the major roads anyway. And they were blocking it off and causing big problems for the economy because the Nepal imports a lot of stuff from India. And the rumor was that that caste was acting at the behest of the Indian government. That was kind of a conspiracy theory that made the rounds. It's not entirely implausible. India has had significant influence in Nepal historically, mostly economically, but some culturally as well. Yeah, even after India became independent, India kind of inherited the British position vis-a-vis Nepal, which is that they should have de facto control over Nepal's foreign policy, given how dependent the country was on them and given its strategic position along the Himalayan mountains. And probably for 40, 50 years after independence, that was more or less an acceptable arrangement for both parties. But after the monarchy fell, people became a little more restive about it in Nepal. They didn't really like the idea of India bossing them around. They wanted to have a more independent foreign policy. And of course, you know, the Maoists being in control of the government at that time kind of made Nepal's government a little more favorable to the People's Republic of China, which obviously neighbors them to the north. I might point out here that just because they're Maoists doesn't mean the Chinese government really fully supported them. Maybe partial support at most, but for the most part, China kind of stays out of the region, other than like Belt and Road investment type stuff. But as far as like supporting rebellions and whatnot, China's generally kind of averse to that. They prefer their border to be quiet and peaceful. Nobody likes having a country undergoing a civil war on their border. It tends to create more problems than it solves. But there was some ideological affinity there on the part of the local Maoists, and that created an awkward situation for India. Because obviously, India, for strategic reasons, wants to make sure that the Chinese military stays on the north side of the Himalayas. If they ever got a foothold on the southern part of the Himalayas, that would give them easy access to the Gangetic Plain. And it would be easier for them to project force into India if there were to be some kind of conflict. So a big part of India's strategy is trying to maintain the Himalayas as a sort of natural defensive line and making sure China never crosses it. So it's partly for that reason that historically they managed the foreign policies of the Himalayan kingdoms, you know, specifically to make sure China didn't take advantage of their relative weakness to deploy their militaries onto the other side of the Himalayas in their territory. So Bhutan actually still retains this arrangement. In fact, a couple of years ago, there was a brief border clash between Bhutan and the Chinese government over this sort of weird, disputed stretch of territory that was like a couple kilometers long. And the Bhutanese had to call in the Indian government and its military in order to help them because they couldn't really defy the Chinese, owing to the Bhutanese military being so much smaller.
chat saying it's pronounced Bhutan.
Bhutan, I'll defer to them on that. But after Nepal's government changed, 20 some years ago, India's hold over their foreign policy weakened considerably. And as a result, the foreign policy orientation of Nepal has kind of vacillated between China and India. India still retains much more influence just because there's so much more infrastructure linking them and their economies together, whereas China kind of has the Tibetan plateau between the bulk of China and Nepal, which makes it relatively difficult for China to project force there. I would remind everybody that infrastructure in Tibet is still relatively weak. The Chinese government has invested a lot over time, but it's not nearly at the level as it is in the rest of China. So it is still, even now, relatively difficult for China to project military force into its west, and certainly across the border into Nepal. But they have made gains. And they have tried to take advantage of the changes in Nepalese politics over time in order to build relations there. I think the Nepali public is not really interested in siding with one or the other. They and their government seem to prefer to play them off of each other. That is to say, play China and India off of each other in order to ensure maximum gains for Nepal. But for the moment, anyway, I would say that India probably still has the advantage as far as overall influence. And I don't think they would react well if Nepal signed a military treaty or something that would allow Chinese troops to be deployed there. That would probably be considered a crisis in New Delhi. So that's not likely to happen, but it's the kind of thing the Indian government worries about, hence the competition over Nepal.
But if it did happen, there would be more sword fights in the mountains.
Probably more than sword fights. You know, again, it's the sort of lowland area on the other side of the Himalayas, on the south side, that the Indians are worried about. You know, those mountain passes, not so much of an issue, because they're already policing most of those. Have you ever heard of Sikkim?
Sikkim, no.
Yeah, so that was another Himalayan kingdom that had been independent for a long time. Similar to Bhutan, I guess, in that it was sort of just a small, Buddhist monarchy that the British had never bothered conquering. The unique thing about Sikkim is that it had its territory encompassed, rather, one of the few passes through the Himalayan mountains, which made it strategically important. So after independence, I think about 10, 15 years after India became independent, they started thinking about annexing Sikkim because they were worried about China potentially using it. Well, not using it, but conquering Sikkim and then using the pass to get past the Himalayas. And I don't remember if it was before or after the border war with China that India made their play, but they eventually did just forcibly annex Sikkim. As far as I know, there was not like a plebiscite or some referendum or some such. I believe they just did move in and seize it for their own national security interest. So it's actually a state now. India has, 24 so different states. Sikkim became one of them as a result of this. And it's an approach they did not take to any of the other states, Bhutan or Nepal, which retained their independence. But Sikkim ran out of luck. I think the only other major Himalayan kingdom was Kashmir, technically, although that actually was part of the British Empire, British India, if you like. And after independence, as a result of independence, it did briefly become independent. The prince that governed Kashmir did not want to join India or Pakistan. And like all of the other princely states in British India, he was given the choice of the third option, becoming independent, which he took. But that didn't last very long because Pakistan basically invaded, sort of implicitly, indirectly. Technically, they invaded via Pashtun militiamen who were acting as the Pakistani army's proxies for the most part. And so that, of course, precipitated the First Indo-Pak War in 1948-49, whenever it was. And so then Kashmir ceased to be an independent Himalayan kingdom and became split between India and Pakistan. Yeah, so the Himalayas are actually a sort of geostrategically significant area. It's been a relatively happening place over the past half-plus century.
Seems like it would be really difficult to navigate for combat.
The mountains would be, but it would depend entirely on your ability to traverse them quickly. If you could get to one of the passes before they could be fortified, since as far as I know, they're still not particularly fortified even now, then hypothetically you could send significant units through those passes and then set up a quote-unquote bridgehead, so to speak, on the other side of the mountains. Yeah, the trouble India has is that even their frontier along the Himalayan mountains is not especially well built up in terms of infrastructure. One of the disputed territories in the region that they have disputed with China is the province state, I should say, of Arunachal Pradesh, which is a northeastern Indian state. It sits astride the Himalayan mountains. And it's very hard even for the Indian military to actually get there. There's just not a lot of roads, highways, rails, etc. You pretty much have to go by air. India still has better access to that area than China does, but that's just because Tibet is so huge and not sufficiently built up in terms of infrastructure. But India, by and large, suffers from the same problem. So as a result, again, the region is not especially well fortified for the most part. There has been a trend towards trying to build up military infrastructure over the past 10 years in the Himalayas, more so by the Chinese, but also by the Indians to a lesser degree. So there has been progress in that regard, but there's still a long way to go. So if you could get presumably a really light mobile unit into the Himalayas and rapidly seize one of the more poorly defended passes, then hypothetically, you would be able to follow that up very quickly with an invasion that could penetrate to the other side of the mountains. So in that ideal scenario, you would not have to fight in the mountains at all. Now, in a less than ideal scenario, one or the other side would successfully fortify the passes before the opponent could get through. In that case, yeah, you're right. There would be very difficult fighting in the mountains. It's not an easy place to fight, not just physically because of the terrain, but also just the logistics involved would be very difficult for both sides.
So Nepal had their business. The thing that I think got the most attention was probably the guy who was shot. And
the assassination.
Yeah. Well, how political is this person? I know almost nothing about this individual. So.
How political was Charlie Kirk? Wow, that's a question. Very.
Okay.
He was very political. He was, how do you describe Charlie Kirk? I mean, my impression of him is that he was one of those avatars of fringe politics. An infotainer, if you like. He had a strong online presence. He was one of the, kind of like, maybe not exactly like Shapiro, but similar in that he had his YouTube channel, he had a podcast, he would talk about politics, and he made an audience out of kind of owning the libs, debating people. That was one of the big things. He would go to campus and debate whomever. But I never really got the impression it was really serious. Again, it was mostly just sort of cable news style infotainment. So I don't really think all of the accusations that this is like the biggest assassination since MLK are really accurate. He was really more of a media personality than a major political figure. The online world has been particularly incensed by this because the chronically online right insists that it's a major political assassination and that this augurs the collapse of peaceful political relations in the United States. And then the chronically online left, in turn, has been chortling about it, which just makes people even madder. Everybody else is just sort of bemused by the whole thing. Because, again, I think a lot of people, obviously including yourself, weren't really familiar with Charlie Kirk's work or his online presence. Yeah, he was an avatar of chronically online politics. So for people who view and learn about politics principally through, being chronically online, he's a well-known figure for them, but not necessarily the broader population. Yeah, and all of the details about the assassination, we don't have all of the details yet. It's still kind of a developing story. Yeah, we'll see what the motive was. There's been some serious victim Olympics going on online on social media over the motive of the shooter. We keep learning new details, and it kind of goes back and forth between he was left-wing or he's a groyper. Those seem to be the two leading candidates right now.
What is a groyper?
That's That's another chronically online term. I don't blame you for not knowing it. That reflects well on you. That's basically far right, sort of a white nationalist or white nationalist adjacent term. It's associated with a commentator named Nick Fuentes and his supporters.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a lot of tension between elements of the far right. You know, Charlie Kirk was more Christian nationalist, you know, kind of closer to normal, quote unquote, far right politics.
Mm-hmm.
And the Groypers are more like borderline fascist.
I see.
You know, they want, yeah, they're much more extreme in outlook. And they don't like guys like Charlie Kirk because they see them as grifters. They see them as people who kind of tease that they want white nationalism or Christian nationalism, but are actually just interested in making money, just inciting people, engaging in rhetoric, but never actually doing anything. The far right, sort of the Groyper far right, for example, doesn't especially like Trump anymore because they don't think he's actually serious about white nationalism or far right revolution in the United States. They see him as just kind of using them in order to win votes and get into power and then just do fuck all with it. So there's some suspicion that the shooter may have been a Groyper that was, you know, attacking a political enemy, rival, if you like, on the right. But there's also evidence that he was just angry left-wing guy who wanted to kill a prominent right-wing figure. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. I don't really think it's going to matter that much in the grand scheme of things. I think the Victim Olympics are a bit overrated at this point. You know, the chronically online culture war becomes more and more over time detached from mainstream politics. I'm not saying it's not relevant, but I think people kind of, if you are just a casual politics enjoyer, so to speak, the spectacle of watching people argue about who the killer was and what that might mean for advantaging their own side probably seems a little bit morbid at this point. Such is the state of politics.
Damn.
But we'll see. I'm sure when the motive is kind of firmly verified, you'll hear about it for sure. It'll definitely make the rounds.
Yeah, it seemed like the guy was a memester. Based on.
Oh yeah, did you hear about the shell casings?
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty bizarre. Irreverent online humor and political violence is not a combination I was expecting for the 21st century, but here we are. That is a thing now.
I didn't know about this. I don't know if you would call it a rivalry, but hostility between this Groyper group and like more kind of normal Christian nationalists. It makes sense. It's just I don't go to those spaces, so I wouldn't really know.
Well, I mean, you can kind of think of it as a mirror image of people on the far left being unsatisfied, to put it mildly, with the establishment Democrats. Because the far left sees establishment Democrats as just stringing them along and teasing them about actually wanting socialism, but then never actually doing it, and then fighting them whenever they actually make ground. You know, you can kind of see that with Bernie Sanders getting popular, but then losing it in the primaries, and then people blaming the establishment for conspiring against him to ensure he didn't win. Mm-hmm. And there's also a lot of complaining on the far left about nominally left-wing media spaces not being sufficiently left-wing or not being forceful enough in attacking the right. You know, there's a sense that they're just sort of stringing them along to make money off of them without actually engaging in radical politics. So there's a similar phenomena on the right, where people on the far right don't like grifters. You know, they see them as just bullshitting them in order to kind of make a living off of infotainment without ever actually indulging in or advocating truly radical policies that could actually dramatically change politics in the United States. There are a lot of grifters in America's political spaces now. I feel like there's more than there used to be. They've always been there.
It's very, very straightforward to monetize with how the algorithms work. Because like anything that's political and anger baiting is going to link you to all the other stuff, and that's a very wide scene with a lot of demand because it gives people a strong emotional reaction. And that's one of the ways that you cut through the noise on the internet is you have a very loud message. It's not necessarily a true message or even a like high quality one, but if it's emotionally salient, then that's going to get the most shares and the most clicks. And many people are very satisfied with emotional answers to complex problems that are more human and relatable, that would work in like a smaller tribe size. We are hunter-gatherers, so it's interesting to hear about the he said, she said kind of way of thinking, and also scapegoating, where you're putting the responsibility of a very complex problem on one person. All that kind of stuff boils down to post angry political shit, get many clicks.
Yeah.
We've even had some StarCraft people, like formerly primary StarCraft people, be political content creators. And we have this Sunday segment, but we're not exactly anger baiting people. But if you do get very angry from our segment, please do give us a YouTube comment so we know what the issue was about. Thank you.
We appreciate feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, regrettably, the barrier to entry is very low now, and the quality has fallen correspondingly. Lots of people just make money off of, I guess, what is basically agitprop. You know, they just produce politically incendiary material, rhetoric, YouTube videos, YouTube channels, YouTube careers even. And that's just their thing. That's how they make a living. Whether or not they actually believe it, who knows? Mm-hmm. They tend to kind of blow with the wind. You know, guys like Charlie Kirk included, they tended to change their position depending on the prevailing rhetoric. I don't think it's been an especially healthy change for the health of the overall body politic and the politics of the country. But it is technically free speech, right? You can't really ban it per se.
Yeah, but what you were saying about the Spanish-American War made me realize it's one of those always has been things.
Yeah.
Because like selling fake news is something that has happened before video news even existed.
Yeah.
Tabloid newspapers and stuff that were drumming up stuff that was untrue. So it's a tale as old as time. It's just because content creation is so easy now, it's a lot harder than it used to be, like relatively getting your hands on a printing press. Everybody has a phone, so technically everybody could make an incendiary political post. Not everyone had a printing press.
Yeah. Yeah, the issue has been supercharged. But beyond that, I don't really have like a hot take on it. You know, murder bad, don't murder people. Political violence can easily devolve into a tit-for-tat series of killings that spirals out of control very readily. And people are not going to like what that looks like if it happens. And I would point out the people who start civil wars are not the people who end up fighting them or finishing them. You may have some weird fantasy about what it would look like, but I assure you it will become very gruesome very quickly, and the fighting will be fought and led by people who you are not going to like. Violent conflicts attracts a very particular type of person who is not especially political, but who is attracted to violence, and they're not really going to care too much about your actual politics. They're just going to care about hurting people. That's going to be their thing. Hurting people, making money, abusing their power. Like, that's what it invariably devolves into. And it's not going to have a front line. It's going to be everywhere. It's going to be militia checkpoints on streets. It's going to be random assassinations. It's going to be somebody not liking the way you talk and then just shooting you before you can even react. Like, true political violence in a modern sense is very, very rarely clear-cut. There's not going to be like clear-cut geographies where you're going to be safe or not safe. It's just going to be ubiquitous. So I would caution people to be careful what they wish for in that regard. Fortunately, again, I doubt we're really that close to that. Even if there is a rising trend of political violence in the United States, it's still relatively mild. Like the 60s were way more violent than anything we've seen yet. Like it would have to, current political violence in the US would have to ramp up considerably to reach a level of the 1960s. Hopefully that will not happen. Again, people will not like what that looks like in practice. But we'll see. They did catch the shooter. His name was Tyler Robinson. And apparently he'd only recently got into politics within the past couple years. He has kind of a funky profile. Generally, the assassins we've seen crop up over the past couple of years have been older, and they tend to be some kind of crazy, some kind of dysfunctional. But this guy seems relatively well adjusted. He went to college for one semester, dropped out, and then went to a technical college. So he was in education. He was not a NEET, right? He was not just some guy at home with his parents not doing anything. So he was going to school. A couple other details we had: he's not registered. Well, he is registered to vote, but he's not affiliated with a political party. Although he has not voted in at least 2 general elections, from what I read. He was listed as inactive in the voter rolls, in other words. If you've been following this online, a lot of this you probably already know, so this is more for your benefit, Neuro. His family background, very Republican, very Mormon, just a traditional conservative family in the area. He himself was described as quiet. It's probably not surprising. So these are basically all the details I have thus far. I think there was a classmate who went to school with him in high school who released some kind of video and did an interview where he stated that he was a quote-unquote Reddit kid and that he had more left-wing beliefs. So that's about the only evidence we have thus far regarding political leanings. So that suggests to me that he probably is more left-wing, but the guy in question was not a friend of the shooter. He was just some guy, basically, who kind of was at the same school. That's what I gleaned from his statement, anyway. So it could be that he misinterpreted the Reddit kid, so to speak. It's possible to be a right-wing Reddit kid. Most Reddit kids are left-wing in orientation, but it is quite possible to be right or even far right. Those spaces do exist on Reddit. Mm-hmm. But the early evidence is leaning more towards left-wing motivation, for what that's worth. But yeah, beyond that, we don't have any evidence yet that he was an extremist, per se. Obviously, he did something very extreme, but he didn't advocate mass murder or totalitarianism. He didn't have some long screed that he wrote in the form of the manifesto. None of that has come out yet. Near as we can tell, he shot Charlie Kirk, then went home, and then hinted that it might have been him to his roommate, and then admitted that it was. And then the roommate, basically after that, felt compelled to tip off the FBI. I think there was a similar story regarding his father. After his father found out, he told a family member, and then the family member told the FBI. I've heard different things about that, though. I've also heard that the father himself turned him into the FBI, so the stories have not really quite been clear-cut as of yet. Again, it's a developing story, so we're probably going to get mixed messages on that.
And it was a sniper rifle was the weapon used?
No, actually, it was a hunting rifle, technically.
Huh.
Yeah, just like basic hunting rifle. It wasn't spec'd out, specifically for sniping, per se. Mm. There was some debate online about the quality of the shot. Some people were saying, that's a really difficult shot to make from the top of a building, 200 feet away, roughly speaking. But then other people were saying that actually, with a scope and, with favorable conditions, it's not that hard a shot. I guess I would agree, because I had thought that the guy who tried to shoot Trump, the first guy, not the second guy, was making a relatively difficult shot, but then some people in chat were actually saying that it was not. So, in keeping with that, I guess it is a relatively easy shot. Mm-hmm. Have you seen it?
I have not.
I think it was, I think he got him in the neck. it entered one side of the neck and then came out the other. And yeah, it probably hit some kind of artery or something, because there was a lot of blood. So he probably didn't last very long after the shot. I was kind of surprised by the reaction to that online, because there's a lot of blood, but it's like, that's not the goriest video I've seen online. I don't know if people remember the Christchurch shooting from back when, but that was considerably gorier. And there's certainly a lot of stuff coming out of Ukraine that would be considered way, way gorier than that. But most people, I assume, I infer, probably not watching those kinds of videos. So yeah, if you're not familiar with that kind of content, then I could see how that would seem particularly traumatizing. Let's see, I didn't have a whole lot else on it. I don't think the implications are going to be that great. You know, again, he wasn't like a politician, civil rights leader, etc. He is just kind of a media personality. So, you know, obviously condolences to the family and whatnot, but like, he probably will just get replaced imminently within the next month or two. So his role in society, so to speak, is not going to go unfilled. And I think that'll limit the overall impact. I think if somebody went around killing either politicians or civil society leaders, like lawyers or leadership working for the ACLU, for example, like that would be more substantive. I think that would garner a much stronger response, not only from the government, but just from broader society. Let's see, what else did I have? I guess just a couple comments. Assassins continue to choose weird targets. Like if you're going to assassinate a political figure, like why a mid-tier media personality? That seems like an odd choice to me. I think the fact that that was an intuitive choice for the shooter kind of suggests that sort of the grifter media has become more and more central to politics. Because it used to be that political commentary and whatnot and just leadership of political discourse was more in the hands of actual politicians and civil society leaders historically, but more and more it seems to be defined by this chronically online discourse, which is a little bit divorced from the actual reality of political institutions, be they government or private. I guess that's just another sign of decline, or maybe just the sign of the internet having its effect. Probably both. Oh, American politics becoming a parody of itself. The whole thing is bizarre and ridiculous. The bullet casings in particular kind of emphasize that. You couldn't write something this stupid, or at least 10 years ago, you could not have written a parody of American politics that would be this stupid and gotten away with it. You would have been laughed out of the building trying to do something like this. Have you heard the context of the shooting? So he was shot doing one of his college appearances, right, where he kind of sets up shop and records himself debating people, whatnot. And he was actually making a point about gun violence when he was shot.
Yeah,
they were going back and forth about it. Yeah. Yeah, and I think the last thing he said was whether or not the person he was debating with wanted to count gang violence or not. And then, boom, like right on cue. Let's see, just mention that. Oh yeah, some of the commentary feels hypocritical to people on the right. This is commentary from the left about the shooting. A lot of that feels hypocritical to people on the right, because it does feel a little bit like when the right said that George Floyd was no angel. Didn't deserve to die, but he wasn't an angel. So some of the leftist discourse about Kurt kind of has similar vibes. Like he didn't deserve to die, but he was also an asshole. So, you know, people on the right have noted that, and that's part of the reason for their agitation.
Yeah, but as a reminder, chat, Violence is not the way when it comes to shifting the landscape of intellectual discourse. The best way to conquer and annihilate your opponent is to defeat their arguments at the foundation in such a sense that they realize it themselves and so do their following. So,
Yeah.
get a peaceful win condition.
And I don't think there's going to be a civil war, because it would be a civil war between mostly the chronically online right and left. And that's not going to be much of a civil war.
And they would just prefer to shitpost at each other.
Yeah. You could basically ban the sale of fish sticks and chicken tenders, and they would all starve to death. Easy solution. Let's see. I guess the last point here is that, kind of thinking about the context, I was wondering if maybe this isn't emblematic of a sort of clash between a combination of the far left and far right on one hand, and then the sort of apolitical middle. Because a lot of the reason Trump has been successful politically is because he's mobilized first-time voters, people who have traditionally been pretty disinterested in politics. And that crowd, being unfamiliar with politics, has good intentions, but also being relatively uninformed about the history of political norms in the United States, the structure of the government, sort of the philosophy behind American governance, sometimes ends up crossing boundaries that it doesn't aware exist. And so ends up agitating one or the other of the far left or far right, without necessarily meaning to. So obviously the far left and far right are not allies per se, but they have been growing over time. The general trend in American politics, as far as the distribution of voters along the political spectrum, has been that people have been gravitating towards the wings of the spectrum, away from the center over time, such that we no longer really have a bell curve anymore, so much as we have a bimodal distribution, where we have peaks on the left and the right, and then we have a dip in the middle instead of a peak. And so there's this sort of well-intentioned but naive middle of apolitical centrists who have inadvertently become kingmakers. And their naivete kind of manifests in bizarre positions that sometimes seem contradictory to people who have been more involved in politics for longer. And I wonder if some of the political violence we've seen isn't a manifestation, rather, of that centrist reaction to the pressure they feel from the wings. Because Mangione, for example, which I would contrast the current shooting with, also feels like a relatively more centrist assassination, in the sense that Mangione himself, near as we can tell, was not like a radical. He didn't advocate for communism, socialism, etc., some of the traditional ideas that are associated with the far left. The idea of having just some kind of healthcare reform or universal healthcare, that's kind of a traditional center-left position. So you could characterize his assassination of the healthcare executive as kind of a centrist radicalism. So depending on how the motives of this shooter, of Charlie Koch shooter, pan out, it could be that he's of a similar bent. He could be kind of a centrist radical who is killing over something, for something that would have been considered fairly mundane a couple decades ago. Now, this is just me spitballing. This is just theoretical. Obviously, Mangione or this guy could have more radical views than I'm suggesting here. But in general, you could say that part of what propelled Trump to power is a kind of centrist dissatisfaction, not with any particular wing of American politics, but with the politically active parts of the population in general. That is one potential framing for the overall state, so to speak, of American politics. And it could be that until one of the other wing kind of caves into that, recognizes the desire for something resembling normalcy and some kind of alternative to perpetual culture war or perpetual cold civil war, whoever is willing to kind of concede that and meet them on that and give that to them is probably going to win power for a significant period of time. Trump has kind of revealed that to a degree, but he's also kind of a weird sort of disruptive populist who isn't quite meeting the demand for normalcy. So in this framing, there is potential for somebody new to come in whom is willing to do the things Trump does as far as just being overall positive about America and wanting general, better political environment, even if he himself doesn't really embody that, and do that without all of the Trumpian theatrics and drama. I think that could be a new equilibrium at some point. And just as a final trivia piece about this, have you ever heard of Jezebel?
In the Bible?
Not. I should specify the magazine Jezebel.
No. What's it about?
That's a left-wing feminist outlet. They've been around for some time.
Okay.
So apparently Jezebel paid some witches a couple weeks ago to curse Charlie Kirk. Oh, sorry, it was more recent than that, a few days ago. They paid some witches to curse Charlie Kirk a few days ago.
Really?
Yeah, seriously. And I saw on Reddit today there was some witches group of some kind of association.
I believe those are called covens.
Covens, I guess. They were saying that, the death of anybody is, the loss of human life is a serious issue, and we don't want to say that we were responsible, but we also assert that our magic is very impactful.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, like I said, if you wrote a parody 10 years ago that had this stuff in it, it would have been too ridiculous. Oh, I didn't even tell you about, who was it? I want to say it was the Attorney General in Utah had a press conference where he actually read the bullet casings out loud.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, that was absolutely as ridiculous as it sounds. I have no idea why he felt compelled to do that. He could have easily just displayed them. You didn't need to read them, but he did.
We live in city times.
Yeah. So long story short, don't assassinate people.
Yeah.
That's not helping.
Makes sense to me. So we also
normally...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, normally when we do these, at least recently, we've been starting at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of assumed we would today too. So I actually was eating a meal when you texted me. So I might be a little discombobulated.
It's okay. I'm discombobulated with the subathon. Thank you for accommodating the change in time.
No problem. Well, thank you for having me. Well, now that we got the controversial stuff out of the way, why don't we talk about Israel?
Oh, yeah. That's always a nice cool down lap for people.
Yeah, they've been in the news too. Did you hear about them?
No.
They bombed Qatar.
Oh, why?
Yeah. They were trying to assassinate Hamas's chief negotiator, Mr. Khalil el-Hayya, I believe. He's been their kind of point man in the negotiations with Israel over the current conflict in Gaza. And as I recall, he was killed in a strike in Doha, the capital of Qatar. And there was even a couple security personnel working for Qatar's Ministry of the Interior who were also killed. It's quite the bold move. Normally, Israel doesn't attack, countries that are under the protection of the United States. But in this case, they did. So there's a bunch of questions about who knew what when. Mm-hmm. Supposedly, according to Saudi Arabia's state TV, for whatever that's worth, the Israelis got an okay from Washington. In other words, they asked them permission and received it. But whether or not that's true, we haven't really gotten confirmation yet. But it seems unlikely that they would do something this dramatic without some kind of lead warning. Israel has been bold in the past about doing things the American government doesn't like. It would not be wholly unprecedented. But attacking the country that is hosting a major American fleet, that is a bit much even for them.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. But I'm inclined to think that they got Washington's permission first, at least. This also comes after they had nominally, supposedly, made a proposal in the negotiations that they were encouraging Hamas to take. Making a proposal and then killing the counterparty's negotiator is not exactly a signal of good faith. And I would point out that it was the negotiator and not like some senior leader here. The Israelis say that the negotiator was himself involved in the planning of the attack in October 23, I believe it was now. But I'm sure there are other people in Hamas's senior leadership in Qatar who also could be implicated in it, and it seems they were not targets in the assassination strike. So it seems, at least given what I know now, that the Israelis were trying to send a signal about the negotiations, specifically that they're not really interested. Given that they are kind of escalating the conflict in Gaza right now, attacking Gaza City and whatnot, and trying to get broad swaths of the population to basically relocate to quote-unquote humanitarian camps. That's not necessarily surprising. Still like a big escalation, a bold move, but that seems to be the trend with the conflict. It does seem to be ramping up ratchet style over time. The Israeli government, for its part, just does not seem to be feeling enough pressure anyway. There's some, but enough pressure to feel the need to de-escalate. And so they are continuing on with their whatever it is they have planned. Again, that itself is a subject of debate. Like, do they want to expel the population? Do they just want to punish Hamas? Is Netanyahu being honest when he says he just wants to defeat Hamas and replace them? Like, all of this is very unclear right now. We don't know. We probably won't know. Probably all of the real discussion about their actual motives is happening at a very high level that the public is not going to be privy to. Trump did come out and say that he gave a statement to the leader of Qatar, and he said that he, quote, feels badly, end quote, for the strike's location, and that, quote, such a thing will not happen again on their soil, end quote. So that would suggest that the Israelis did not have Washington's permission, and that maybe Washington will castigate them over this in order to ensure it doesn't happen again. So that's also a possibility here. But this could also just be the Trump administration covering their ass and trying to do damage control. I really would not put that past them either. It could also be just a clusterfuck. It could be that the Israelis thought they had confirmation with one guy or one part of the administration, but then maybe they didn't actually go to Trump with it. And so maybe Trump didn't actually know about it until after the fact. That's the kind of staff dysfunction that the Trump administration has been historically associated with. So that possibility can't be ruled out either. Regardless, the Qataris are very upset, and other Gulf Arab monarchies are similarly disquieted about this. They would think that the United States would try to deal with an issue like this more diplomatically than just allowing the Israelis to assassinate somebody, which is their suspicion at this point. They tend to be very suspicious of Washington's motives vis-a-vis Israel. So this combined with what is perceived in the region as American inaction after Iranian attacks on oil facilities over the past 10 years in Gulf countries, kind of has a lot of them a little bit skeptical about the veracity of America's commitment to their security. There's not really an alternative, so I don't think they'll actually do much about this, but American credibility does get a little hurt when things like this happen. So that's been the drama. Like much drama involving Israel, probably nothing of substance will be done about it. but it is destabilizing somewhat for the region, in so much as the region is already very upset at Israel over the whole Gaza situation. I would point out that the region here does not necessarily include governments in the region, which don't really care about the Palestinian issue that much. They have a somewhat different perspective. They see it as more something that they can use periodically to incite or otherwise build credibility with their population, depending on how they want to frame it on a given day. In general, Arab governments in the region, especially the Gulf monarchies, are much more concerned about Iran than they are about Israel and the Palestinians. So they have kind of marginalized the Palestinian issue in their foreign policies. When Israel kind of engages in hostilities with the Palestinians, generally they have to pay at least a little more attention to it, especially the more agitated their publics get. But regional governments have proven pretty adept at containing that. So most likely they'll just continue on ignoring it for the most part. Token statements of sympathy, but no weapons and no significant diplomatic pressure. Let's see. Did have a couple more items here. Yeah, Brazil.
Bolsonaro jail.
Yeah, he was actually convicted by the Supreme Court of plotting a coup. So I think the sentence was 26 years, something like that. Pretty substantive. I'm interested to see how the Trump administration reacts. For those who don't remember, the Trump administration actually inflicted tariffs of about 50%, I think it was, on Brazil in retaliation for the investigation and court case against Bolsonaro over the alleged coup that he was plotting. The Trump administration apparently feels that Bolsonaro is being persecuted and wanted the Brazilian government to back off as a condition of lifting tariffs. So the Brazilian government very obviously has not done that, and it looks like Bolsonaro is going to jail. So what then does the Trump administration do now? Do they just kind of maintain the demand that he be freed and keep the tariffs in place, or do they just kind of drop it? I don't really know how committed they are to Bolsonaro in the grand scheme of things. And it could be that they weren't even all that serious in the first place. It may be that if the Brazilian government plays ball in whatever kind of trade deal, quote unquote, that the Trump administration wants to negotiate with them, that they may just drop the demands about Bolsonaro entirely. We'll have to wait and see.
I would think it would be pretty loose. Like, you remind me of myself. I'm going to shitpost about you to back you up. And that's about it.
Yeah, that was kind of my assumption, but we'll see. He's nothing if not mercurial. I don't really have a lot of commentary on it beyond that. It's not necessarily surprising that they put him in jail. There was a lot of discussion about it back when it happened, and they already jailed the generals that had been involved in the plot. I did read one analyst argue that jailing a major opposition leader, even if he's guilty, is kind of dangerous, because it does raise the incentive of people who engage in wrongdoing while serving in office to try to stay in office as long as possible in order to avoid going to jail. One of the big problems with trying to maintain a democratic political system is making sure that people feel comfortable giving up power, so to speak. If people feel like giving up power is tantamount to going to jail because your rivals are going to come after you once you're out of office, that incentivizes authoritarianism, right? That incentivizes ignoring democratic norms and trying to hold on to power as long as possible in order to avoid reprisal. So trying to ensure that everybody feels safe in a democratic political culture is a part of maintaining the integrity of a democratic political system.
Yeah, that makes sense, because if your punishment for being out of office is point of ruin, then you want to just stay in office as much as possible by whatever means, because you're going to have something worse happen later anyway.
Yeah. So even if the guy you're going after is guilty, it may be that by successfully convicting him, you're convincing the next shithead who gets into power to stay in power permanently as best they can in order to avoid the same fate, which is not a great precedent in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. Of course, it would be better not to elect shitheads in the first place, but people are fallible. It's going to happen. It's going to happen sooner or later, even in the most stable of political cultures. So you do need to have precedents in place and institutions and norms in place that serve to mitigate the damage those kinds of leaders can do, and to ensure that when the time comes, they do actually step down and relinquish power. Obvious relevance to the current sitting president. Lots of people talked about wanting to send him to jail, but you can see how well that went. It's not entirely a bad thing that he never went to jail, because you can imagine how much worse things would be if he was elected president while he was in jail and then became president, because then he would have a very strong incentive to never stop being president.
Would he be temporarily let out of jail if he was elected in jail? Or do you president from jail?
I mean, depending on where he was convicted in jail, he could always just pardon himself, couldn't he?
Oh, true. Oh, pardon me. By the way, I'll just be leaving.
So I'm inclined to think it was a good thing that Bolsonaro was jailed, because he is kind of a corrupt adjutant in Brazilian politics. But whenever political figures gain a certain threshold of popularity, you do have to take into consideration that popularity when going after them for wrongdoing. Ultimately, it's better to have a body politic that votes for honest politicians. But sometimes there's going to be people that are in the thrall of a populist. And you're going to have to make some difficult trade-offs about the stability of the overall system versus punishing them for wrongdoing, for the aforementioned reasons. I think you mentioned protests in London.
Yeah.
So those were right-wing protests. It was a right-wing protest. It was a large protest, and I think it was 100,000 people, something to that effect. It's quite large. I believe the main thing that they were protesting is immigration. Mm-hmm. So it was a 100,000 strong anti-immigration protest in London. 110,000 people, according to my notes. There was also a smaller counter-protest, the so-called Stand Up to Racism counter-protest, which attracted about 5,000 people. Let's see, I noted in the article they mentioned that the UK is facing a record number of asylum claims, apparently. So there's apparently more than 28,000 migrants who have arrived across the Channel in this year alone, which I guess is a lot if you're a smaller country like the UK. Those are pretty rookie numbers for the United States. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about that. I think Tommy Robinson, a well-known right-wing figure in the UK, was the guy organizing the protest. Immigration has definitely become like one of the hot-button issues, mobilizing the right wing. And I would point out not a few people on the left wing in Western politics, Western being like European American politics. I think we talked last week about similar protests in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the same thing, basically. Let's see. Oh, we didn't talk about Ukraine yet. What did I do with it? I know I had notes on that. There it is. It's up at the top. So did you hear about the news out of, actually it wasn't Ukraine, but it's Ukraine adjacent. Did you hear about the Russian drones this past week?
Yes, that was mentioned today, thanks to chat.
Gotcha. Let's see. So there was, what was it, is it a dozen or 2 dozen? There was a decent number of Russian drones that crossed into Polish airspace from Ukraine. 3 of them were shot down. Others just ended up disappearing, presumably crashing on Polish territory. And given the sheer number of drones involved, many commentators have kind of run on the assumption that it was done deliberately. The Russians say it was an accident, that Ukrainian electronic warfare made them veer off course. But a lot of people find that a little unbelievable. So the debate right now is whether or not this is a challenge by Russia to NATO, whether this is a kind of test of NATO's resolve, and if so, what should NATO do about it? So Poland, for its part, was and is particularly excited about this. They activated Article 4, I believe, of the NATO treaty, which is not nearly as exciting as Article 5. Article 5 is the Mutual Defense Clause, so that would trigger armed conflict effectively. Article 4 is basically a talking shop. We'll talk about something we're worried about. So not really all that dramatic in the grand scheme of things, but there were discussions with NATO allies, and they did decide that they were going to deploy more military assets to Poland and the Baltics in order to deter Russia. What that amounts to in practice is not all that much, because Europe and its defenses remains underfunded and more than a little bit underpowered. The United States, for its part, doesn't seem to be participating. So I don't know how much deterrent value this is actually going to have. But there will be more assets in Poland, at least, so that will have some effect. And then the update here is that I think today or yesterday, there was a couple of Russian drones that entered Romanian airspace, which is just basically further fueling the fire of people accusing Russia of doing it on purpose. I would point out that Romania is also a member of NATO here. So this could be a challenge from Russia. It's kind of a weak one, but I think it does deserve at least some response, preferably something more than just deploying some extra assets into Poland and the Baltics. I don't think it necessarily has to be some kind of direct intervention in Ukraine, but I think a relatively more forceful response is justified. I think even Trump himself tweeted about this and was a little bit surprised, although that doesn't really mean anything. I don't really take his social media accounts very seriously. So we'll see what the people in his administration that are actually responsible for deciding what to do about things like this decide on in response. We shall see. Let's see, there was another random Trump thing. This is kind of another social media thing, so make of it what you will, but he did post a whole screed, you know how he writes, about how the United States will be ready to levy additional sanctions, tariffs, etc. on Russia, but only if Europe stops buying oil from Russia. He also wants American allies to implement tariffs on China from 50 to 100% in order to encourage them, in turn, to discourage Russia from continuing the conflict in Ukraine. And he goes on to say that these tariffs will be lifted once the Ukraine conflict is over. So this kind of came out of nowhere, and I don't know how serious he and the administration actually are about this. I'm inclined to assume not very, so this will probably just disappear in a couple of weeks. But of the random nonsensical bullshit Trump frequently posts on social media, this one actually does make some sense. The United States is either helping Ukraine or it's not. So this would be consistent with helping Ukraine. even if it is going to agitate a number of American allies who do lots of trade with China, getting on side as far as putting more pressure on Russia and China, in so much as it's aiding Russia in the war, is not a bad idea. But it is the kind of thing you kind of have to do carefully and preferably in conjunction with allies. It's not really something that I would recommend springing on everybody all at once, as the Trump administration is wont to do. So while I think the idea is not bad, once again, with the Trump administration, they seem to really struggle with implementation and process. You do have to kind of sit down, strategize, think things out, and try to plan the best way to do a thing. And they rarely seem to actually do that. Their preferred approach to process seems to be to do things and see what sticks. That can be useful in times when a given issue is just deadlocked or is stagnated for a long time, but it's not something you should be doing all the time. So we'll see what comes of this. I think it would be helpful to Ukraine if they did take it seriously, but probably nothing will come of it. Let's see, Norway had an election. Long story short, the center-left won, but the far-right made gains. You could probably use that same description to describe any number of elections in Europe over the past 10 years. So more of the same in Norway. Let's see. I think those are the big stories. Still got a couple other items. Was there anything in particular you wanted to visit?
Let me check the ones that I had. London protest. Indonesia riots?
Oh, we already talked about those weeks ago.
Oh.
I don't know if you remember, but that was the whole thing about the police accidentally killing a protester during a protest, and then they escalated and they set fire to their parliament building. That we did talk about it. Yeah, it had to do with stipends, politicians getting stipends that were higher than the public was comfortable with, and that got people angry about corruption and politicians getting too much money. Yeah, I think we ended up talking more about the history of Indonesia than the actual protests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that. It was just mentioned today. I don't know if they saw that, bud. But we do have a previous episode, I think 2 weeks back. Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks back.
Yeah, thereabouts. Well, let's see. We did have a YouTube comment requesting that I talk a little bit about China's investment in Afghanistan's oil sector. Since apparently that is a thing that happened after the US pulled out of Afghanistan. And I think there was also a comment also kind of asking about that. Specifically, they were mentioning that some Chinese nationals had been detained in Afghanistan who had been working in Afghanistan's oil sector. So I looked it up, and it's pretty much what I expected. Basically, after the US left, China tried to fill the vacuum, or at least tried to address the vacuum in Afghanistan by dealing with the new Taliban government. And when I say dealing with, what I mean is that they organized diplomatic relations. I don't know if they ever officially recognized them or not, but I think they did set up an embassy and establish diplomatic relations. And they also set up some trade deals, one of which is that a Chinese oil company would invest in the oil sector in Afghanistan. Mind you, Afghanistan has very little oil. So this isn't really like a big industry. This was not a big concession on the part of the Afghan government. But it was seen as a way, at least on the part of the Chinese government, to try to build relations and to try to build stability in Afghanistan after the war had ended. Mind you, a stable Afghanistan is in China's interest because it's very close to Xinjiang, which is itself a restive Muslim majority. I guess it's not a majority anymore, but there's a large minority of ethnic Uyghurs in Xinjiang who are Muslim. So unrest in Afghanistan is a threat to China. They perceive that as a foreign policy priority, specifically because, many militant Uyghurs have left Xinjiang and trained in Afghanistan, Yemen, etc. They've kind of joined the broader universe of radical jihadi groups of one kind or another. So Afghanistan is particularly notable in that regard because it has such a history with jihadi groups, and again, because of the proximity to China. So they wanted to try to stabilize the situation partly with investment. So that meant investing in the oil sector, among others. But as I would have guessed, at the time, after the war ended, Afghanistan's economic environment, the business climate, so to speak, is too anarchic and unpredictable to ever really make it an attractive investment locale. And from what I was reading about the Chinese nationals that were detained, that has been borne out. Basically what happened is that some government officials took their passports, that is to say, took the passports of Chinese nationals working in Afghanistan's oil sector, and told them, mind you, these are not just low-level workers, these are like executives, Chinese executives who were running the operation. They had their passports taken, they were detained, and they were effectively told, you need to sign off all of the assets that you have invested in and built up here and hand them over to us. And if you do that, we'll give you your passports and you can leave.
Wow.
Yeah. So effectively, they're seizing the assets that had been jointly developed as part of this program and kicking the Chinese out. I don't think they're doing this for like strategic reasons, like because they hate China or whatever. Certainly not being done, on account of the Uyghurs. Rather, I just think it's about the money. It's not unusual in corrupt governments in unstable developing countries to just steal shit because they want to, because this, that, or the other actor within the government needs or wants the money for something. Maybe it's because he just wants it for himself. Maybe it's because he needs it to bribe somebody higher up in order to keep his job or get a promotion. But, as we've talked about before on here, when corruption gets entrenched in a political culture, it becomes very difficult to extract, and it can become endemic. And, the Taliban government is just a clear-cut example of that. So it's not surprising at all that they would end up turning on the Chinese here. And I don't think it was for like long-term strategic reasons, again, just short-term game. You con them into putting money into the country and then you take it. It's pretty much as simple as that. And given how mercenary a lot of groups are in Afghanistan, it's not surprising that they would prioritize making money over the stability of the country or loyalty to the government. A lot of people see alliances with the government or the Taliban as being transactional, and that part of the benefit of working with them is that they have access to government positions that come with power that they can abuse in order to make money. That's kind of an inherent part of the trade-off there. The Taliban were never like a single political party that was unified and centralized. It was always pretty hurly-burly, decentralized, kind of an alliance of tribes that had a nominal common interest, but that otherwise fight with each other for control. So that has kind of manifested in the relatively chaotic management of Afghanistan since the Taliban has taken over. I don't doubt that the Chinese government is still going to be interested in trying to stabilize Afghanistan. They'll probably still try to invest money there. But that money is going to be less about actual business or about underlining any kind of actual alliance with the Taliban. It is going to be more like a bribe. Effectively, to kind of reference Chinese history, it's going to be akin to previous dynasties bribing barbarians not to attack China.
Mm-hmm.
So whether or not that works out, we'll see. I don't doubt, given the dire economic circumstances in Afghanistan since the war ended, that money will be most welcome. And so that could actually be enough to sway them. But at the same time, the government kind of lacks authority, and there's a lot of chaotic agents running around Afghanistan, be they warlords, jihadis, what have you. So it may be that even if the Afghan government itself is successfully bribed, that it's not enough to stop radical actors from engaging in activity that might be deleterious to China's national security interest. I imagine given their lack of ability to project force there and to influence Afghanistan, they're just going to take things on a case-by-case basis. For now, things have been relatively quiet, so they're probably content with the status quo. But how long that lasts is anybody's guess. We'll see. Let's see, we got another YouTube question. What comments do I have about the concept of presidential life insurance? I don't really have any feelings about it. I mean, it makes sense. I guess it could be used as some kind of corrupt avenue, but I'm not really sure how. Yeah, I haven't really heard anything about presidential life insurance or it being an issue, so I'm not even really sure what the impetus for the question would be. But I haven't really heard about it or thought about it ever.
There was at least one question from Twitch chat as well.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I'll take a look if I can find, yeah. How does attacking Qatar affect Israeli and American relations with other nations in the region? Negatively, to put it mildly. They're not happy about it. But like I mentioned, there's not really any alternative to American protection in the region. You know, Russia for a while pretended that it had the ability to protect countries in the region, but Bashar al-Assad lost the civil war. Iran was successfully eviscerated, or at least its nuclear program was, largely without consequence. So that doesn't really leave Russia looking as a viable alternative. China, as an up-and-coming power, hypothetically could do it, but they've shown no interest in it. Their only interest in the Middle East is buying energy, and beyond that, they're quite happy to take a hands-off approach to the region's endemic conflict. You know, they don't really want to be involved in that. It's just too messy. They don't want to piss anybody off. They buy oil from both the Saudis and the Iranians, for example. So for them, having decent relations with everybody is preferable so that they can continue to maintain secure energy supplies. But being friends with everybody in the Middle East is kind of the same as being friends with nobody, given the rivalries there. So China's foreign policy in the region tends to be pretty innocuous and bland. So that only really leaves the United States as the only other real alternative to provide regional security. So even if the United States, assuming that Washington did actually consent to the Israelis launching the attack, assuming the United States did allow it to go forward, even if they're mad about it, they can't really do anything about it. It's possible they could try to send in treaties to Beijing or Moscow, but ultimately they're not going to get good responses that will be satisfying to them. And ultimately, their main rival is not going to be Israel, even if Israel does like heinous shit that a lot of people in the Arab world don't like. Like the main focus, like I said earlier, for governments in the region is Iran. You know, Iran is seen as a revolutionary force that threatens establishment monarchies in the region. And that's a much bigger concern if you're a monarchy than, you know, some Palestinians getting moked by the IDF. So they'll complain about it, and they'll probably tap back channels to ask Washington what the fuck the deal is, because nominally Washington is supposed to protect them, certainly from other American allies. But I don't think much will actually happen. Maybe Trump is being honest when he says that it won't happen again. Maybe he didn't really know about it, and he's actually going to try to crack down a little bit on Israeli misbehavior in that regard. But that's assuming, again, Washington didn't actually consent to it in the first place. And I'm inclined to guess that they did. So probably Washington will tell them to just calm down and take it. And in the end, while American credibility will be damaged somewhat, they'll probably just accept it and move on. Yeah, I remember maybe 10 years ago, no, more than that, because this would have been during the late Obama administration. a lot of Gulf monarchies were upset with the Obama administration because of the nuclear deal negotiations with Iran. They believed the Obama administration was going too easy on the Iranians, was giving too much away, and was not doing enough to secure the interests of Arab allies in the Middle East. And one of the comments that that I read in Foreign Affairs, which is a prominent foreign policy outlet, was that leaders in the region felt like the United States didn't know how to be a superpower anymore. Because in previous eras, Washington had thrown its weight around. It had dictated events in the region. And there was some room for regional actors to kind of push back, but when Washington cracked down, people generally fell in line. And there was a sense that the Obama admin didn't know how to do that and wasn't going hard enough. So the Trump administration obviously has a very different issue. They have no issue throwing American weight around. So they definitely do remember how to be a superpower. But the Gulf monarchy allies of the United States don't particularly appreciate how that weight is being thrown around. So now they've kind of switched from having an American ally that is not forceful enough to one that is too forceful, perhaps mercurially so. Let's see. What is the aftermath of Yemen's prime minister getting off? Just replaced. Doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. I mean, the Houthis are running a relatively disheveled, poorly funded government. Like it was originally a kind of cult. Maybe cult isn't the right word. It was a minor religious sect that was geographically specific to the north of Yemen. And the militia that they founded, that had been intermittently skirmishing with the Saudis for like 10 years before the war in Yemen started, that was a militia mostly led and manned by locals. So for a militia like that to go from local security to running a government is a pretty big leap. And the results kind of show it is not really a particularly well-run government. So killing off the prime minister, yeah, that's a problem. But ultimately, given how little power the prime minister really had to direct activity within the government, in the territory that they governed, that is, it's probably not that meaningful in the grand scheme. Yeah, I don't think it's going to change anything as far as like the as far as the Houthis, rather, becoming more deferential to Israeli security interests. Probably they'll just keep lobbing rockets. Their emphasis really is on the civil war in Yemen, which I think is kind of on ice right now. I believe a year or two ago there was a ceasefire agreed, which I think is still in place. But the Houthis, for their part, do not feel bound by that ceasefire as far as Israel goes. They're quite happy to lob munitions their way in response to Gaza, for example. So I don't think Israeli retaliation is going to be enough to deter them, because there's just not enough there for them to bomb, basically, to really deter them. The government is just too weak. Let's see, that's all the questions we had in the Discord thing here.
There was another one just now. They said, what's the deal with waiting so long to get Maduro? Waiting for a good moment or more intelligence?
What do you mean by get him? Well, not you, but like, what does the commenter mean by get him? Like regime change, invasion, assassination, something like that?
Get him.
I talked about it last week. Washington is not serious about going after Maduro. They don't really care. The whole thing is just theater. Both the Venezuelan government under the Chavistas and Washington, particularly Washington under Trump, both take the opportunity to vilify each other in order to build support at home. You know, the Venezuelan government likes to paint the United States as a violently aggressive imperialist power that wants to destroy their government because it's an example of successful socialism in Latin America, although obviously successful is very much the descriptor they would use. I don't think any outsiders would use that. And then the American government under Trump, for its part, likes to point to Venezuela and accuse it of being an example of a violent, failed narco state. Another example of a failed attempt at socialism resulting in the destruction of a country that is threatening its neighbors by dint of its inability to police people and traffickers in its own borders. So again, it's just political theater. You can do that. You can make that kind of rhetoric, and then people get on your side because they think, because they agree with you, and because they think you're going to do something about it. But neither side ever does. It's, again, kayfabe, the word I like to use, because in kayfabe, both parties are in on it. They both know it's fake, and they do it because it's mutually beneficial.
I'm going to talk some shit about you. You're going to talk some shit about me. Everyone's going to be amazed and appalled. And we're both going to get increases in ratings.
Yeah. Like if Washington really wanted to go to war with Venezuela, or maybe try to change the government violently without a full-on invasion, like they could do it. It's totally conceivable. It's well within the U.S. military's power. But it's much more politically convenient to just talk about doing it than to ever actually do anything. It makes them sound tough without actually taking any risks. So they're not waiting on anything. It's just cheap talk. I don't know if I ever got around to this correction, but I did have a correction from a couple weeks ago. So I was talking about Papua New Guinea, and I was saying that I thought it was mostly still pagan. And somebody in chat corrected me. Apparently it is like 95% Christian. So I was way off. Thank you for the correction. That's probably a good cue for the usual disclaimer. I'm not an expert in everything I talk about on here. I have more of a background in economics and foreign policy. So if I ever say anything wrong, stupid, or biased, please do correct me. If I'm wrong, I want to know more than anybody. So participation by chat is encouraged in that regard. And we do appreciate the feedback we get. I don't read chat while we do this, but I will read it later when I go through the VOD. Oh, and I think one of the mods asked in one of the chats I was reading from previous weeks, they were wondering whether I just read the chat log or if I read it with the video, and it is with the video. That does help contextualize the comments. It would be a little weird and disassociating to just read them without the video. What else? Syria? No, we did that. Did that. I guess we could do the Trump highlight reel that's been piling up. Haven't done it in a while. Let's see. How are we doing on time, by the way?
Been going for almost 2 hours.
Gotcha. Understood. Let's see. Have you been following the drama about Chicago at all?
No, aside from him saying that he was going to be tough on crime or something there.
Yeah, he was saying, this is the Trump administration, for those not familiar, was threatening to send the military to Chicago to deal with the crime problem there. And they said it like that, like it was going to be some bold move to kind of skirt the law and try to have the military deal with local policing issues. But what they really meant is what they did in LA, which is to basically just send National Guardsmen to nearby military bases and also federal facilities in order to provide security for those facilities, all of which is technically legal. It's a bit unprecedented, and generally governments prefer to avoid politicizing the military in this way, where you're trying to use them to deal with what is fundamentally a political issue. But of course, the Trump administration famously doesn't particularly care about such norms. So more theater, effectively, same as with LA, Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. being more substantive, since they actually could just formally deploy them to the city. But in Chicago, they were saying they wanted to do something like that again. They may have decided not to do it. I remember they said that they had deployed National Guardsmen there, but later on they said that they would actually not do it and that they were going to send troops to Memphis, Tennessee instead. That's been the more recent development with that story. They say that the leadership of Memphis has been much more receptive to the idea of National Guardsmen coming into the city and helping with this, that, or the other thing. Presumably crime. That seems to be the thing they're most focused on. Chicago's mayor famously was very, very resistant to the idea of the federal government deploying troops to Chicago. And that seems, I guess, to have deterred them, much to my surprise. So I guess the action going forward will now be Memphis, although whether or not they actually follow through with it, anybody's guess. We'll see. From what I've heard and read, most of the National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C. ended up picking up trash and things like that. So that may be the amount of activity any federal deployment to Memphis gets up to, in which case it could just be more kayfabe on the part of the feds and Memphis mayoral leadership. They may be able to have some fancy media where they are portraying themselves as taking hard action on crime and then show video of the National Guardsmen or whatever. Meanwhile, nothing of substance is really being done or changing. That would be my expectation. Again, for those of you who maybe haven't been part of this conversation, lots of countries around the world have tried to use their militaries to deal with crime issues. Generally crime issues much worse than the ones in the United States, and very rarely have they succeeded. It is generally a failing effort because soldiers are trained to kill people, right? That's their job. That's what you want them to focus on. That is not a training that involves dealing with the nuances of policing communities or dealing with social problems like drugs, theft, etc. That's the kind of stuff that generally is better dealt with at a local level by people who are more familiar with the communities in question. And generally it involves not only arresting people, there is a hard element there, but you also need a softer touch. You need to negotiate with people. You need to talk with community leaders, etc. You need all of that sort of frou-frou stuff that the right generally doesn't like very much, but actually does have tangible benefits to it. You kind of need to balance the frou-frou stuff with the hard edge, basically. This is all very technical language. I'm sure everybody is very impressed. This is not a subject that I have studied in depth, but my understanding from what I have read about policing and from what I've learned, in conversations with relatives who have been police, is that policing is not something that soldiers can really do well. It's not a core competency or really a competency at all. So it's generally something to be avoided for that reason. It's also something to be avoided for the reasons I already mentioned, which is that it's generally politically very aggressive and agitates broad swaths of the population. And then, of course, there's the fact that soldiers can be trigger happy. Accidents can happen. And that's generally itself extremely bad PR. It not only is bad PR for the government, it's bad PR for the military itself. So that's been the drama as far as deploying the military to Chicago. We may have gotten past it at this point, but we'll see. It may yet come up again. Now, let's see. RFK has been in the news a bunch. Let's see. So he's been making changes, obviously, in the Department of Health. Wait, it's not the Department of Health, right? I forget which department he was made the head of. I'm sure chat will correct me on that.
I think that's correct.
Sorry, what?
I think that's correct, or is that FDA? CDC.
CDC, that's one of them, but it's not just the CDC. Oh. I think there was all right, I'm going to look it up because now that's going to bug
Health
me.
and Human Services.
Health and Human Services, there we go.
Thank you.
So he's been implementing reforms in the form of cuts and whatnot and trying to change some of the underlying orientation and strategy. And a lot of that effort has kind of been focused on vaccines of one kind or another, not all that surprising. But also he's been launching studies into things like autism and whatnot, all stuff that he kind of ran on. I think he's also released some statements about processed food and making new recommendations therein, that kind of thing. For the past month or two, some of the drama has centered around the ACIP panel, the Advisory Community on Immunization Practices. There we go. And this is a committee that makes recommendations on who should receive what vaccines. And these recommendations have some weight. It's nothing binding, but generally insurance companies will actually base what they'll cover and not cover partly on the recommendations from this committee. And so Kennedy has basically purged it and replaced it with his own people. He accused the previous members of being, quote, plagued with persistent conflicts of interest, end quote. Keep in mind that part of his rhetoric is that a lot of the traditional medical and health establishment, both in government and the private sector, is corrupt and is interested in trying to get people to take more drugs, medications, et cetera, in order to make more money for pharmaceutical corporations. So he sees and, well, saw the people who had been serving as kind of part of that ecosystem and seems to have wanted them gone for that reason. Let's see, he also withdrew COVID vaccine recommendations for pregnant women and healthy children. And in August/September, he approved new versions of the COVID vaccine only for Americans over 65 or those with certain underlying medical conditions. So these are changes from the previous recommendations, which had been more permissive, basically had recommended the vaccine be available to effectively everybody. I don't have it in my notes here, but I think part of the logic for not recommending it for pregnant women was that he thinks that vaccines, or at least the COVID vaccine maybe, is a determinant of autism in unborn children, or potentially causes autism in children if they're exposed to vaccines while still in the womb. I believe that's the logic. And of course, that's a very controversial assessment. The health establishment very much does not agree with that. So let's see, the other big dramatic thing, and the main reason this is in my notes at all, is that he fired the head of the CDC, Susan Monarez, not sure on the pronunciation there. She says that she was fired because, well, after being told by Kennedy to, quote, pre-approve the recommendation of the ACIP committee. And she disagreed with that, and he apparently responded to that by removing her. So that led to a cascade of resignations among the senior leadership of the CDC. And among the people who resigned after the fact in protest of the CDC head's removal included the chief medical officer, the director of immunization, and the director of emerging diseases. And I think there might have been a couple others as well, all of whom say that they disagreed with Kennedy's management. And to me, interestingly, they had all been appointed by the Trump administration. So these are not holdovers from the previous Biden administration. These are people that the Trump admin itself had actually appointed to work under Kennedy. And they themselves apparently believed that Kennedy's management was suspect, to put it mildly. Now, let's see, as a response to this, medical organizations in the private sector and also public organizations in several states have been formulating their own recommendations ahead of the fall immunization campaign. This is what I read. They disagree with the CDC's recommendations, and though basically they want to create their own that insurance companies in their states can use as an alternative in order to ensure people continue to have access, or at least have their insurance cover access to shots. I had a couple ancillary notes here related to this, but not directly dealing with Kennedy and his management. One of them is the so-called West Coast Health Alliance. So like I mentioned, some health organizations in the public sector in a couple states have been working together. Here's an example of the states of California, Oregon, and Washington saying that they're going to cooperate together to create common recommendations on vaccines as an alternative to the federal government's recommendations, which they now at this point do not trust. And in other cases, some states have actually ordered state insurers to cover vaccines in defiance of the federal recommendations. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there's Florida, which announced that it's going to end all state vaccine mandates, including for children to attend schools. That seems a little radical to me, but we'll see how that pans out. So a little bit of RFK drama to chew on there. Next up in September, early September here, there was a big celebration in Beijing celebrating the end of World War II and the defeat of Japan. And so there was a big military march, and the Chinese government invited a number of leaders from close allies. Trump, for his part, was excluded, but no surprise. Previous examples of celebrations have involved states, or at least representatives from states that were not necessarily allied with China. But here they've excluded basically everybody but insiders that they are close to. So Putin showed up from Russia, Kim Jong-un showed up from North Korea, and I think a couple others that were sort of just miscellaneous. The reason I bring this up is that Trump could not resist commenting on it. Trump seems to resent that he was not invited. And he called the ceremony beautiful, quote unquote. And he went on to say on social media, quote, "I watched the speech last night. President Xi is a friend of mine, but I thought that the United States should have been mentioned last night during that speech because we helped China very, very much," end quote. Yeah, that's not a very diplomatic thing to say about a country celebrating its victory in World War II. Naturally, Trump has to make it about him. So make of that what you will. Not exactly a shining moment for American diplomacy. It would have been better either not to comment at all or just to give some generic diplomatic response, best wishes, whatever. That's generally how you handle things like this. Whining on whatever the Trump, social media. That isn't going to change anything. I have to assume he's doing that for a domestic political audience, because diplomatically, that's just hilarious. Oh yeah, there was a side note to this. Apparently, Xi Jinping and Putin were caught on a hot mic talking about how technology was improving and that humans might live to 150 in the future. So that got the internet talking about how dictators are infatuated with longevity and try to find ways to prolong their life as much as possible.
Well, it kind of goes back to your retaining power so that you don't go to jail. That would be another way of avoiding yielding your power and going to jail or dying. It's just you live forever.
Yeah. That's one way to get around it. But as medical technology stands right now, at this point, it only feels like dictators live forever. They always seem to live into their 70s and 80s these days. I think Mugabe was like 100 when he died, or something ridiculous like that. Mugabe was hilarious. Do you remember Mugabe?
What country was he from again?
That's Zimbabwe.
Oh.
Yeah, I think maybe 10 years ago he would be a more common name, but he's kind of been out of the news for a while, so people don't remember him as well. Yeah, he had fought in Zimbabwe's revolution that threw out the British, the Rhodesian government, maybe I should say, which is a little bit different. And he had been, long story short, he had been in power a very long time, was very corrupt, effectively ran an authoritarian government that actually ruined the economy, which kind of undermined his popularity, but he was still able to stay in power because he managed his patronage network sufficiently well that nobody was willing to turn on him. And the public, of course, couldn't do anything because dissent was largely suppressed. The issue, though, is that when he was getting older, there was talk about what would happen after he died, because invariably you're not going to live forever, right? So people are going to start maneuvering ahead of that. And Mugabe wanted his wife to succeed him. And that turned out to be a problem because everybody hated his wife. All of the government insiders in his patronage network hated her, did not want her to take power. And their dislike was sufficient that they actually launched a coup to prevent it.
Wow.
And that's actually how he was kicked out of power finally. So his regime, such as it was, is actually still in power. All of the people he had depended on to kind of suppress dissent, to keep him in power, those guys are still around. So things haven't really actually changed all that much in Zimbabwe since he's gone. This was more of an internal matter, kind of a family matter, so to speak. Everybody says that, we all love dad, but we really don't want mom managing his estate. So we're just going to push him into retirement a little bit early and make sure that his wife can't do anything. And the funny thing was that while he was pushed out, he was not killed or arrested. They basically put him under house arrest. And the funniest thing to me is that they still let him on the internet. So he was actually just ranting online the whole time after he was expelled from power, and continued to do so for years afterwards, just squealing about how unfair it was and how these bastards are traitors. And everybody just ignored him. They didn't want to do anything to him, but they also didn't want him in power, so they just kind of let him squeal online. An angry old man on Reddit, basically.
Another one of the terminally online, I guess.
Pretty much. Pretty much. That's how he finished his life. Maybe that's the future for all of us. Oh, right. There's this. There was a big ice raid in Georgia that targeted a Hyundai battery plant. Did we talk about this already?
I don't think so.
Don't think so. Okay. So basically, this is a big plant that I think Samsung was investing in to produce batteries in Georgia. And I believe it was batteries for electric vehicles or something to that effect. And ICE targeted it and arrested something like 400 Koreans who were allegedly working there illegally. Apparently, they were on short-term visas, but the visas had apparently expired, I guess, or maybe it was that the terms of the maybe it was that the terms of the visas did not allow them to work. In other words, one of the conditions of being allowed for a little while is that they not actually do any jobs in the economy. But whatever it was technically illegal, so they were rounded up and shipped out en masse. And the South Korean government was upset about that because while they haven't said it explicitly, implicitly, I think they thought they had an understanding with the American government about this. Because one of the things the United States government has wanted foreign allies, especially companies like Samsung, is that they want them to invest in American manufacturing. The trouble that a lot of these companies have when they try to do that is that, one, it's just very expensive, but also there's very few of the people with the skills they need to set up these factories and run them that are available in the United States. A lot of those skills have basically disappeared from the American economy. So the arrangement that they came to with the Biden administration is that they would be able to send some skilled Korean workers in order to help set up the new factories. And I kind of suspect, again, I can't prove it, but I think the Biden administration probably tacitly agreed to let them abuse visas in the short term in order to expedite the process. Because there were so many people that they wanted to bring over to do this that it was just easier to kind of give them visas that were conditioned on the visa recipient not working, but then just not enforce it. That was probably, I would guess, faster than giving them an actual work visa. So my guess is that the Koreans thought they had an arrangement in place and that it would continue to be honored, and then the Trump administration turned on them. Probably because ICE has quotas now. Quotas, by the way, are just a terrible way to do fucking anything. It invariably leads to people being stupid and crazy, because people will do anything to meet quota. So ICE probably saw this as an opportunity to kind of get numbers in order to meet a quota. But in turn, it did kind of implicitly break what I suspect was an established agreement, albeit a handshake agreement. So some people were happy to see them go because they were apparently there illegally. I don't think the government was making that up. Although I think there was at least one guy who did have the correct visa and was deported anyway. But most of them were here illegally. But I think probably there's going to be some bad blood that falls out from this on the Korean side, because they do need at least some of those workers there in order to help set up the factories. And now it looks like they're not going to have access to them, which brings into question how any of this is going to actually be possible. And the last I read, Samsung and I think some other companies had suspended work on new factories in the United States until this can be cleared up. Probably they'll negotiate with the administration and come to some kind of new arrangement. I don't think this is going to be like a permanent break. But for the Korean government, it was embarrassing because, of course, nobody likes seeing their countrymen just be deported en masse. Invariably, nationalists of one kind or another are going to complain about that kind of thing. So the Korean government was put into a spot, didn't appreciate it, and is probably going to be a little bit wary going forward about implicit agreements of the sort that the Trump administration probably violated here. I would add here that Samsung, for its part, denies that it's responsible for the workers being in the country illegally. They're blaming it on a subcontractor, as is tradition with corporations. That's always the get out of jail free card with them. But even so, I think they're lying, as they frequently do. And two, I think they knew about the implicit agreement and were in on it. And that's part of the reason they've suspended work on other projects. Yeah, this is kind of just another manifestation of the inconsistency in the industrial policy the Trump administration wants to push. You know, if you do want foreigners to invest, you're going to need skilled labor. And if we don't have the skilled labor necessary to do that, then you're going to have to import it. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that you let them stay indefinitely, but you at least let them stay long enough to get off the ground and start things up. If you're not even finishing that, then you're not really serious about industrial policy. That wouldn't surprise me. I don't think the Trump administration is really all that serious about most of their economic policy. They seem to enjoy using it more for theater than pursuing actual objectives. But I think things will just return to normal in a few months. That's generally how these things go. For now, it's just kind of awkward for everybody. Let's see. The headquarters of U.S. Space Command will move to Alabama from Colorado. That reverses a Biden administration decision that had been to have the headquarters in Colorado instead of Alabama, which apparently was done in protest of, what was it? Restrictive abortion law. Hmm? So you really can't blame the Trump administration for this one, because the Biden administration kind of made a choice here for partisan reasons. So unsurprisingly, tit for tat, the Trump administration has reversed it and gone in the other direction.
Wait, you said Space Command?
Yeah, this is the new space thing. What is it?
Space Force.
Space Force. There you go. That's what it is.
You have to say it like that. Space Force.
Yeah, they had to decide where to put their headquarters. Alabama was actually the initial choice. It was decided that that was actually the optimal location, even in the Biden administration, but they made the choice to move it to Colorado for the aforementioned partisan reason.
They're saying Space Command is not Space Force. Well, then what is Space Command?
It's not Space Force, really.
Oh.
That's news to me. I'd assumed that they were the same thing.
Is it like NASA stuff?
No, I don't think so. Let's see. U.S. Space Command. Oh, not the website. Just Wikipedia, please. Thank you, Google. Unified Combatant Command, U.S. DoD, responsible military operations, outer space. Originally created 1985. Okay, so then it's older than Space Force. Space Force is responsible for organizing, training, and equipping the majority of forces for Space Command. Okay, so they are different things then.
They're related.
Spacecom disestablished 2002, reestablished 2019. Huh. Well, the more you know, I guess.
We haven't had any fights in space, right? The closest thing is...
Yeah, technically that's illegal by treaty.
Okay.
So no combat in space, unless you want to count interception of ballistic missiles in low orbit, in which case, kind of, sort of, if you want to consider low orbit in space.
So that means we're going to have a space police as well to be able to enforce that rule.
Well, I think everybody just kind of enforces it themselves. Historically, it's just been too expensive to really do it on a large scale, so the cost disincentive has been sufficient just by itself. But hypothetically, as it becomes more cost efficient, yeah, you might possibly need some kind of force in space to actually deter people from militarizing it. But I guess even that would be militarization. The treaty isn't just don't use weapons in space. The treaty stipulates that you're not supposed to develop weapons for space at all. Oh. So even just putting something up there that could be used as a weapon technically breaches the treaty. Which is why when weapons for space are developed, they're generally developed under the guise of something else. I think we've talked about that before.
But how are we going to defend against aliens if we can't develop space weapons? You laugh, but I've seen Independence Day.
Yeah, a fine documentary.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, District 9 is probably a more accurate portrayal of what that would be like.
Yeah.
Did you ever... there was an anime I recommended to you a while back. It was Obsolete, I think it was called.
Don't think I saw it.
Yeah, it's a Jin Urobuchi production. Yeah, Obsolete, that's what it was. Good, very short, not a big commitment. Each episode is like 10, 15 minutes, something like that. And there's only 12 episodes or so. But anyway, yeah, I bring it up because... Wait, why did I bring that up?
Fighting
what were we
space,
talking about?
Developing weapons against aliens?
Right. Oh, right, aliens. Yeah, that's what it was. So Obsolete takes a different approach to aliens, which is that they come to trade. So they're not coming to conquer like in Independence Day, and they're not coming as refugees like in District 9. They just kind of show up and then say, hey, we've got stuff. What do you want to give us for it?
Dude, I have a fresh idea then. What if they were cultural explorers and they just wanted to browse our meme catalog?
I guess that's possible. That seems very expensive.
Yeah, but...
Like, traveling through space has to be expensive, even for aliens. So just going around and watching memes in other cultures seems very cost inefficient.
Well, it's what we do, so... You just need to find a cost-efficient... Well, we browse memes. We don't travel through space to do so, but if they're sufficiently advanced and they've figured out how to generate energy on a massive scale, then it might be a fun mode of tourism for them. Alien pop-up ads. Yep, we're going to get them with the monetization. If they have enough money to get here, we can definitely monetize the shit out of this. Keep workshopping it, Chad. We're going to figure this out.
Let's see. Okay, Department of Defense renamed to Department of War. Did you hear about this one?
Wow, that's aggressive. Okay.
Well, apparently it used to be called Department of War until the 50s, or maybe late 40s, when they switched it over. Although I've heard mixed things about that. But regardless, the Trump administration wants to rename it to DoD. Technically, they actually can't do it without congressional approval. So what he did is write an executive order that allows leaders to use secondary titles, like Secretary of War. And he's also instructed the Secretary of Defense / Secretary of War, Hegseth, to recommend the legislation and executive actions that would be required to make the renaming permanent. So basically, he's allowing the Department of Defense and the Secretary of Defense to be informally referred to as the Department of War and Secretary of War. Kind of, sort of skirting Congress, but not officially. Very much the kind of thing they like to do these days. So if you see references to the Department of War or the Secretary of War, that's what they mean. They've effectively renamed it, but not officially.
We're going to call you by your middle name from now on. We're not changing your birth certificate, but...
Let's see, there was an executive order mandating the counting of paper ballots in elections, and also restriction of mail-in voting to military personnel and the very sick. Mind you, the president doesn't have the power to tell states how to run their elections, so this is pretty much utterly meaningless and symbolic. But it does raise the question of whether the administration may cite lack of compliance with this order in order to meddle in potential future federal elections. Something to keep your eye on. Let's see, more petty drama, Lisa Cook drama. So Lisa Cook was a member of the board of the Federal Reserve, and Trump fired her, citing allegations of dishonesty in mortgage paperwork. Apparently, she claimed in 2 separate mortgages that the house would be her primary residence. So Cook, for her part, is suing, saying the removal is improper. Markets have been volatile in response because there's a sense that the administration may be making a play to try to take control of and politicize the Federal Reserve. And markets really don't like the politicization of monetary policy because it raises the specter of permanently low interest rates, money printing, and eventually very high inflation, which is going to be a problem for everybody. So independence of central banks, kind of a core tenet of good governance, and has been for some time, but certain administrations have chosen to eschew that, and almost all of them around the world who have done so have kind of lived to regret it. The United States possibly maybe going in a similar direction. Definitely be fireworks there if they actually do politicize the Federal Reserve. I think we already talked about the boat they blew up in the Caribbean. Let's see. Trump announced that he's going to unilaterally reinterpret a 38-year-old arms control treaty to sell sophisticated Reaper-style and other advanced military drones abroad. That's a quote from the article. This is probably a positive thing, because one of the big complaints I've heard out of the defense industry for a couple decades now is that restrictions on the export of military drones are too restrictive for them to compete internationally, with the result being that foreign competition has actually dominated the market. American market share in the drone market is surprisingly small. Almost everybody buys Chinese or Turkish, or maybe other, maybe from other sellers. But because it's so difficult to buy American, hardly anybody does, so the market share is tiny. I did read that part of the impetus here for doing this is that there's a new generation of drones being developed that can fly alongside fighter jets. Some of you interested in aviation probably already know about this. Apparently, the makers of those drones have been lobbying to change the rules, and they have finally apparently been successful. So the impact on traditional drones is going to be actually ancillary to the main objective, which is going to be to clear a path for these newer drones that are being developed. So they accidentally did the right thing here, it seems.
I didn't know drones could go that fast that they can keep up with planes.
Well, the modern ones generally can't. Generally, they're designed to be more fuel efficient and slower. But they have been working on faster ones that can basically be a manned aircraft's de facto wingman. Mm-hmm. I think they're supposed to be autonomous, so basically, robots. And the idea is that they can provide support, carry additional munitions, etc. Maybe carry a few extra pods. I don't know if you're familiar with pods on aircraft.
No.
So aircraft, when you arm them, they can carry bombs and whatnot, right? You attach them under the wing, whatever. So those hard points that you attach them on can also attach to other things. So for example, if you need to go on a mission where you need to suppress enemy electronics of one kind, radar or communications, then what you can do is attach an electronic warfare pod to the aircraft, and that pod will allow it to engage in electronic warfare, jamming of one kind or another.
You're saying like a droid in the X-wing.
Kinda, yeah. Although in this case, it's not autonomous; it's controlled by the pilot. But it gives you extra capability. Instead of attaching a weapon, you're attaching an ability. You can also attach a pod that has targeting equipment. So like whenever you've seen historically footage of something getting bombed by the US military, generally that's footage that's taken from a camera attached to a pod that the pilot is using to paint the target with a laser. Back in the Cold War, back in the Gulf War, the 90s, etc., there was lots of footage like that. And that was not a camera that was actually attached to the aircraft. That was a camera that was part of a pod that was equipped on the aircraft before its mission. I've also heard of pods that have cameras that are used to help identify targets at extremely long ranges. You're not allowed, if I remember correctly, to shoot at a target unless you have visual confirmation that it is a military target. So long-range cameras can help with that, because obviously they can see further than people. I don't know how often those are still used, though. I imagine there might have been changes to the rules by now. Yeah, there's a whole variety of pods that have been developed for this, that, and the other thing. There's also, for example, data link pods that are designed to help process and convey information and data from, say, a headquarters or a forward operating base or something, and have that data relayed to the aircraft and then displayed on a screen that the pilot can see. So that allows the creation of broader networks of equipment. So you can have a single commander sitting in a base, and he can collect data via data pods on aircraft and data processors elsewhere from aircraft, infantry in the field, tanks, etc., and have all that data sent back to him and displayed somewhere on a screen with all of the relevant information. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, basically. So these drones that are designed to be the new wingmen of manned aircraft, they can carry drone pods like this that give them capabilities that can complement the aircraft, help protect the aircraft, that is to say the manned aircraft, and just allow you to do more stuff than you would be able to do otherwise. It always makes me think of Gradius. Have you ever heard of that?
No, what's Gradius?
So Gradius was a bullet hell shooter, right? Where you fly like a plane or a spacecraft or something and then try to dodge enemy fire while shooting at enemy ships. It was an old side-scroller from the 1990s, and I think there was a whole series of them, Gradius, Gradius 2, Gradius 3. And in the game, one of the things that you could get as an upgrade for your aircraft, for your spacecraft rather, were what were called options, and they were these little balls that would fly around the ship in a pattern, and they could be used to fire weapons, and if they impacted an enemy, they would be destroyed. That is to say, the enemy would be destroyed. So whenever I hear about these new kinds of drones, it always makes me think of the options and Gradius. Very similar idea.
Chat's sad that I don't know about Gradius.
It's an old series. You can't blame them. Chat can't blame Neuro for this. It's an old franchise. I think it was Super Nintendo, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't think it's been like updated or like remastered or anything. Don't think there's been any sequels. Maybe I'm just out of date. It's got me curious. It was a fun game, as I recall. Really liked the soundtrack in Gradius 3. I think I have that downloaded on my computer somewhere.
Nice.
Let's see, I think we're almost done here. Just recently, the Supreme Court ruled that the lower court's restriction on ICE's ability to stop people without reasonable suspicion was wrong, and they've revoked it. So ICE can actually, at the moment, stop people and detain them even if they don't have reasonable suspicion, which opens the door to things like prejudice, racial prejudice, ethnic prejudice, since ICE can just see that you have darker skin and assume that you might be from another country and then detain you for that reason. Now, this is not a final ruling. The case is ongoing, but they did remove that restriction at least. And that definitely got people arguing about it on Twitter and other social media spaces. Okay, we got through the highlight reel.
Nice.
As you can see, the admin has been quite busy the past few weeks.
I think you may have another question or two as well.
Let's see. Do you know enough about the Zaibatsu and Cabal and the power they wield to do a breakdown? Talk about it sometime. I could try. I could try right now. If I wait, I could read more about it, because I actually have read about them, but it's been a while. For those who are maybe not familiar with the Zaibatsu and the Cabal, or is it? I never learned how to pronounce that. Is it Cabal or Chabal or Chabal? I'm not really sure. Anyway, these are large corporations. In the case of Zaibatsu in Japan, in the case of Cabal in South Korea. Generally, they're family owned, and generally they have very close ties with the government. And when I say close ties, what I mean is that they cooperate very closely with the government on things like economic policy, investment, management of labor disputes, etc. So they are nominally private, privately owned, that is, but the government, because they're so large and play such a disproportionately large role in their respective economies, the governments have close relations with them in order to manage their respective industrial policies. So, for example, I think Toyota back in the day was a Zaibatsu originally. The Zaibatsu were actually broken up after World War II, but they did continue to exist in a somewhat truncated form and continued to be important to the government's management of the economy. Before World War II, they were basically, excuse me, they were basically monopolists that owned broad swaths of the economy and ran it correspondingly. But they were not oligarchic per se, like in the United States or in a number of developing countries, like, say, Russia. You have oligarchs that kind of just do whatever they want, and then the government reacts to their demands. In the case of Japan, it was the other way around. The government was very much in charge. And the Zaibatsu, or the Chaebol, again, in South Korea's case, they respected the government's dictates. And the quid pro quo was basically that the families that owned these corporations would be able to continue to own them and benefit from them and continue to, basically be hugely wealthy. But in exchange, they had to participate in the government's industrial policy and allow the government to kind of direct them and manage relations between them, because there were multiple. There were multiple Zaibatsu and multiple K-balls that sometimes competed with each other or sometimes not, depending on the industry. But whenever they had a problem with like labor or access to foreign markets or whatever, they could go to the government, and they would generally have people that the ownership would know personally, who they could call and who would deal with it. And in turn, whenever the government wanted to do something as far as like developing a new industry, becoming more self-sufficient, building a school or something like that to train people in a specific skill set, they would call the ownership groups of, the Zaibatsu or the K-balls, and they would have them do it for them. So it was a very tight-knit relationship. It wasn't like a fully free market economy where there's like more of a firewall between economic interests and political interests, nor was it like a command economy or a fully statist economy. Well, I should say it was not like a command economy in the sense that everything was all managed together. It was something in between, what you would call a statist economy, where the state plays a prominent role in managing the economy, but still allows private actors to continue to operate, albeit with limited discretion. So that worked really well for a long time. Japan's economy was able to modernize and develop sort of under the tutelage of the government, and more specifically, the tutelage of the government agency responsible for economic development. In Japan's case, that was famously MIDI. I don't quite recall off the top of my head what the abbreviation stands for. Sorry, acronym, not abbreviation. But basically, it was the Ministry of Economic Development, and they were the ones that took point on managing relations between the Zaibatsu and handling the Zaibatsu's interaction with the countries and the government's industrial policy. So they had a prominent role in the economy for a long time. That is to say, this government agency, as well as the South Korean equivalent. That lasted roughly until the 80s, 90s. In the case of the Zaibatsu, they were already in decline after once they were disbanded, quote unquote, in World War II. And especially after the 80s, when MIDI and its power was significantly curbed. There was a lot of pressure from foreigners because Japanese competition was kind of eating everybody's lunch. And so there was a sense that it was diplomatically inconvenient to have MIDI be so powerful. And there was also a sense that they didn't really need it as much anymore because obviously Japan's economy had reached a significant level of development by the 1980s. So at that point, the power of major Japanese corporations was somewhat curtailed. In South Korea, that happened, I think, partly in the 80s, more so in the 90s. I think especially after the Asian financial crisis. There was a sense that these entities were too powerful, and after the country democratized, there was a lot of left pro-labor political sentiment that had previously been suppressed, and that, when finally allowed to flourish and eventually allowed into power, resulted in significant pressure to curtail the power of these large, very conservative economic institutions, again, the cabal, that had been seen as complicit in the suppression and violence of the previous military junta that had governed South Korea for so long. So after that, a number of laws were passed. And while they still exist today, they're not as influential as they used to be. Still critical to the economy, that can't be denied. But they had way more power before. Before, again, they could just make a phone call and make somebody disappear pretty much. Now there is at least some accountability. Now the political power they wield is mostly just by way of their economic influence rather than by patronage network ties between people at the top of the corporations with people in government. Yeah, there's been some attention paid online to cabals in South Korea as South Korea's profile has risen, as basically its culture has become more popular, K-pop and whatnot. There have been more people, especially young people, who have gained an interest in South Korea. And many of them have noted that, there's a demographic problem in South Korea in the form of low birth rates. And one of the leading explanations that the online community has latched onto is that South Korean capitalism is just so cutthroat, and large corporations like the cabals are just so powerful that nobody can fight against them and create better conditions that might be conducive to a higher birth rate for the common people in South Korea. There's some truth to this story, but it's a little outdated because, again, like I said, the cabals are not nearly as powerful as they used to be. And I would also point out that birth rates are just low everywhere, almost regardless of context and circumstances. It doesn't really matter if a country is very pro-labor or socialist or a Dickensian capitalist nightmare. Like, all of it seems to have the same effect of lowering birth rates. Or if not an effect, then at least has the same correlation. So that's not why birth rates are low. That's just kind of a universal phenomena at this point all over the world. But still, it kind of comes up, so people kind of get the wrong idea. I'm not saying that there should not be more accountability for large corporations in South Korea, or even that labor conditions could not be better. They definitely could. But that's not why they have a demographic problem. I would not blame cabals for that. Did anybody in chat mention how to pronounce that?
Yeah, a couple people, they typed Chaebol.
Chaebol, okay. See, whenever I call them Cabal, it makes me think of the character from Mortal Kombat. I don't know if people remember him. That's me showing my age. I don't think Mortal Kombat has been relevant in a while.
What? They're going to have a new movie coming out.
Are they?
Yeah, Mortal Kombat 10 has come out. Dude, that shit never went away.
Huh.
Yeah, somebody's probably playing Mortal Kombat right now.
No.
That was the only over-the-line game that we owned in the house, but my brother and I weren't allowed to play the first one. We could watch Dad play it on the computer.
Really?
Yeah, so we could watch it with supervision, but they didn't want us doing the gory stuff all the time in that video game.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with the fighting game genre, but I always had the impression that Street Fighter was supposed to be the big one, wasn't it?
I think it still is. The Tekken scene is pretty strong. That one's been around for a long time. Tekken 8 is in the subathon goals. Street Fighter is on their 6th game. Franchise that died but was really fun, Soul Calibur. That's more of weapons-based fighting. And then Dead or Alive was another fighting one. I think that one also hasn't been making games, but it got up to like a 5th game maybe. Did I miss any? Super Smash Brothers Melee. You can't talk about that. Nintendo's sending lawyers to your house right now.
Yeah, that's not quite what I think about when I think of the fighting genre, though. That's kind of, I guess it technically is, but Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, etc. That's part of an older tradition of fighting games.
Yeah, well, chat's saying the big three are Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, and Tekken.
Huh, okay. I always thought Mortal Kombat was kind of more the gimmicky one. I didn't think the mechanics were strong enough for it to have its own audience, but I guess I was wrong.
Yeah, I think it's pretty solid.
Let's see. How will the anti-BDS amendment affect us? Inability to critique Israel seems to conflict with the First Amendment. I hadn't heard anything about this. Yeah, I think it's specifically because of the First Amendment that it basically would be unenforceable, if it is what it sounds like anyway. I know Texas already has something like this. In Texas, there's a bill on the books that does not allow governments, like municipal governments, etc., county governments, etc., to engage in activity, to engage in BDS activity regarding Israel. But I hadn't heard about it applying to speech. That would be news to me.
What is BDS activity?
Let's see, boycott, divest, sanction. Basically, the idea is that the United States should pressure Israel to end the oppression of Palestinians by boycotting Israeli goods, divesting itself of investments in Israel, and by sanctioning trade with Israel. So that's all stuff the government can do, but it's also stuff people as individuals can do. People can just boycott Israeli goods. They can refrain from investing in Israel. I guess they can't really sanction Israel, but yeah, the first two at least, boycotting and divesting, is stuff that anybody can do, hypothetically. So the BDS movement is a movement to get more people doing that, either as individuals or preferably governments. It's been around a while, and a lot of the pro-Israel crowd really doesn't like it, to the point where states like Texas, for example, passed legislation trying to curb it. I hadn't heard about the new effort, though. I'll have to read about that, so I can't really comment on it now. I trust chat is popping off about Israel.
I don't think anyone's gotten banned yet, but the Mr. Kirk stuff got a little bit of spice, but kept it together for the most part.
Yeah, a lot of people have been getting in trouble over that. I think there's some people who were fired from their jobs, if I'm not mistaken, for posting stuff online about it.
Mm-hmm. I believe it.
Yeah, the internet is in full dox the people I hate mode.
Mm-hmm.
As it often is. That's about all I had for today. Is there anything you wanted to get to?
I don't think so. I had the list of everything that I had heard of anyway. We might have had another question or two go through. Unsure.
Last one I saw was the BDS one.
But yeah, we can wrap it up here whenever my match is in.
Gotcha. Let's see, I think there was a couple weird stories I saw. Let me see if I can find them. There was a guy in New Zealand who had some kind of custody battle over his children and lost. And so then he took them into the woods and just disappeared. And apparently he had just been kind of living out in the boonies for years at a time, trying to hide from the authorities with his children. And they weren't found until a couple weeks ago, when he was confronted by the police and got into a shootout and was subsequently shot to death.
Damn.
Yeah, apparently he didn't have like a specific place he was hiding in. Apparently they were just kind of hiking out and camping effectively. Like there were reports of people actually seeing them out in like the boonies, out in the woods.
Is that camping effectively, or they were camping effectively?
Both, I guess, technically. Yeah, he was pretty good at it, I guess. They didn't catch him until just now. I think there was like some video of them. It was almost like footage of Bigfoot almost. They filmed them at a distance, kind of hiking up the side of the hill or something. And there was a report that some kids actually actually found them. You know, they were just kind of out in the wild and just happened upon them. Just kind of briefly talked to the children. I think those were like the two main instances where they interacted with other people.
Bigfoot did, or the police?
Well, the Bigfoot in question, the man and his children. Mm. Was there some other weird shit that happened?
I think Chad mentioned earlier there was a school shooting that happened this week too, but it didn't really get much coverage.
Yeah, it happened around the same time as the Kirk assassination. I think it was in Colorado, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't read the details of it. It just kind of fell out of the headlines. Kind of got crowded out the past week. I don't think it was a big one. I don't think all that many people were killed. I don't think it was a mass shooting per se, at least not in the sensational sense. I think it was more just like a incident. That's not uncommon. You know, sometimes kids get in gangs and then get into fights, sometimes involving guns at school. So my impression is that it was something similar to that. I would defer to Chad on the details. Is it all right if we wrap up a little bit early here?
Yeah. No sweat. Well, Chad, thank you for your participation. Fuzzycore, thank you for handling questions as always. And Agent Smith for your time. We will see you all in the next episode of Well Discussion with Agent Smith.
Yep. Thanks again. Always a privilege. Talk to you next time.
GG.